Hello, dear friends. I've just released a new audiobook narration. Enjoy listening. We wouldn't consider an issue complete without one of Mr. Hammett's stories in it, and after you've read this tale, you'll understand why. I had been told that the man for whom I was hunting lived in a certain Turk Street block, but my informant hadn't been able to give me his house number. Thus it came about that late one rainy afternoon I was canvassing this certain block, ringing each bell, and reciting a myth that went like this. I'm from the law office of Wellington and Berkeley. One of our clients, an elderly lady, was thrown from the rear platform of a streetcar last week and severely injured. Among those who witnessed the accident was a young man whose name we don't know, but we have been told that he lives in this neighborhood. Then I would describe the man I wanted and wind up, do you know of anyone who looks like that? All down one side of the block the answers were, no, no, no. I crossed the street and started to work the other side. The first house, no. The second, no. The third, the fourth, the fifth. No one came to the door in answer to my first ring. After a while I rang again. I had just decided that no one was at home when the knob turned slowly and a little old woman opened the door. She was a very fragile little old woman, with a piece of gray knitting in one hand and faded eyes that twinkled pleasantly behind gold-rimmed spectacles. She wore a stiffly starched apron over a black dress, and there was white lace at her throat. "Good evening," she said, in a thin, friendly voice. "I hope you didn't mind waiting. I always have to peep out to see who's here before I open the door, an old woman's timidity." She laughed, with a little gurgling sound in her throat. "Sorry to disturb you," I apologized. "But won't you come in, please?" "No, I just want a little information. I won't take much of your time." "I wish you would come in," she said, and then added with mock severity, "I'm sure my tea is getting cold." She took my damp hat and coat, and I followed her down a narrow hall to a dim room, where a man got up as we entered. He was old, too, and stout, with a thin white beard that fell upon a white vest that was as stiffly starched as the woman's apron. "Thomas," the little fragile woman told him, "this is Mr. Tracy," I said, because that was the name I had given the other residents of the block. But I came as near blushing when I said it as I have in 15 years. These folks weren't made to be lied to. Their name, I learned, was Quar, and they were an affectionate old couple. She called him Thomas every time she spoke to him, rolling the name around in her mouth as if she liked the taste of it. He called her "my dear" just as frequently, and twice he got up to adjust a cushion more comfortably to her frail back. I had to drink a cup of tea with them and eat some little spiced cookies before I could get them to listen to a question. Then Mrs. Quar made little sympathetic clicking sounds with her tongue and teeth, while I told about the elderly lady who had fallen off a streetcar. The old man rumbled in his beard that it was a damn shame, and gave me a fat and oily cigar. I had to assure them that the fictitious elderly lady was being taken care of, and was coming along nicely. I was afraid they were going to insist upon being taken to see her. Finally, I got away from the accident itself, and described the man I wanted. "Thomas," Mrs. Quar said, "isn't that the young man who lives in the house with the railing? The one who always looks so worried?" The old man stroked his snowy beard and pondered. "But, my dear," he rumbled at last, "hasn't he got dark hair?" She beamed upon her husband, and then upon me. "Thomas is so observant," she said with pride. "I had forgotten. But the young man I spoke of does have dark hair, so he couldn't be the one who saw the accident at all." The old man then suggested that one who lived in the block below might be my man. They discussed this one at some length, before they decided that he was too tall and too old. Mrs. Quar suggested another. They discussed that one and voted against him. Thomas offered a candidate. He was weighed and discarded. They chattered on. "But don't you think, Thomas—" "Yes, my dear, but—" "Of course you're right, Thomas, but—" Two old folks enjoying a chance contact with the world that they had dropped out of. Darkness settled. The old man turned on a light in a tall lamp that threw a soft yellow circle upon us and left the rest of the room dim. The room was a large one, and heavy with the thick hangings and bulky horsehair furniture of a generation ago. I burned the cigar the old man had given me and slumped comfortably down in my chair, letting them run on, putting in a word or two whenever they turned to me. I didn't expect to get any information here, but I was comfortable, and the cigar was a good one. Time enough to go out into the drizzle when I had finished my smoke. Something cold touched the nape of my neck. "Stand up." I didn't stand up. I couldn't. I was paralyzed. I sat and blinked at the Quarries. And looking at them, I knew that something cold couldn't be against the back of my neck. A harsh voice couldn't have ordered me to stand up. It wasn't possible. Mrs. Quar still sat primly upright against the cushions her husband had adjusted to her back. Her eyes still twinkled with friendliness behind her glasses. Her hands were still motionless in her lap, crossed at the wrists over the piece of knitting. The old man still stroked his white beard and let cigar smoke drift unhurriedly from his nostrils. They would go on talking about the young men in the neighborhood who might be the man I wanted. Nothing had happened. I had dozed. "Get up." The cold thing against my neck jabbed deep into the flesh. I stood up. "Frisk him." The harsh voice came from behind. The old man carefully laid his cigar down, came to me, and ran his hands over my body. Satisfied that I was unarmed, he emptied my pockets, dropping the contents upon the chair that I had just left. Mrs. Quar was pouring herself some more tea. "Thomas," she said, "you've overlooked that little watch pocket in the trousers." He found nothing there. "That's all," he told the man behind me, and returned to his chair and cigar. "Turn around, you," the harsh voice ordered. I turned and faced a tall, gaunt, raw-boned man of about my own age, which is 35. He had an ugly face, hollow-cheeked, bony, and spattered with big, pale freckles. His eyes were of a watery blue, and his nose and chin stuck out abruptly. "Know me?" he asked. "No, you're a liar." I didn't argue the point. He was holding a level gun in one big freckled hand. "You're going to know me pretty well before you're through with me," this big, ugly man threatened. "You're going to— Hook!" A voice came from a portiered doorway, the doorway through which The ugly man had no doubt crept up behind me. "Huck, come here." The voice was feminine, young, clear, and musical. "What do you want?" The ugly man called over his shoulder. "He's here." "All right." He turned to Thomas Quar. "Keep this joker safe." From somewhere among his whiskers, his coat, and his stiff white vest, the old man brought out a big black revolver, which he handled with no signs of either weakness or unfamiliarity. The ugly man swept up the things that had been taken from my pockets and carried them through the portieres with him. Mrs. Quar smiled brightly up at me. "Do sit down, Mr. Tracy," she said. I sat. Through the portieres, a new voice came from the next room, a drawling baritone voice whose accent was unmistakably British. Cultured British. "What's up, Hook?" this voice was asking. The harsh voice of the ugly man. "Plenty's up, I'm telling you. They're on to us. I started out a while ago, and as soon as I got to the street, I seen a man I knowed on the other side. He was pointed out to me in Philly 5-6 years ago. I don't know his name, but I remembered his mug. He's a Continental Detective Agency man. I came back in right away, and me and Elvira watched him out of the window. He went to every house on the other side of the street asking questions or something. Then he came over and started to give this side a whirl, and after a while he rings the bell. I tell the old woman and her husband to get him in, stall him along, and see what he says for himself. He's got a song and dance about looking for a guy what's seen an old woman bumped by a streetcar, but that's the bunk. He's gunning for us. There ain't nothing else to it. I went in and stuck him up just now. I meant to wait till you come, but I was scared he'd get nervous and beat it. Here's his stuff, if you want to give it the once-over." The British voice. "You shouldn't have shown yourself to him. The others could have taken care of him." Hook. "What's the diff? Chances is he knows us all anyway, but supposing he didn't, what diff does it make?" The drawling British voice. "It may make a deal of difference. It was stupid." Hook, blustering. "Stupid, huh? You're always belly-aching about other people being stupid. To hell with you, I say. If you don't like my style, to hell with you. Who does all the work? Who's the guy that swings all the jobs, huh? Where—" The young feminine voice. "Now, Hook, for God's sake, don't make that speech again. I've listened to it until I know it by heart." A rustle of papers and the British voice. "I say, Hook, you're correct about his being a detective. Here is an identification card among his things." The Quarrs were listening to the conversation in the next room with as much interest as I, but Thomas Quarr's eyes never left me, and his fat fingers never relaxed about the gun in his lap. His wife sipped tea, with her head cocked on one side in the listening attitude of a bird. Except for the weapon in the old man's lap, there was not a thing to persuade the eye that melodrama was in the room. The Quarrs were, in every other detail, still the pleasant old couple who had given me tea and expressed sympathy for the elderly lady who had been injured. The feminine voice from the next room. "Well, what's to be done? What's our play?" Hook. "That's easy to answer. We're going to knock this sleuth off first thing." The feminine voice. "And put our necks in the noose?" Hook, scornfully. "As if they ain't there if we don't. You don't think this guy ain't after us for the L.A. job, do you?" The British voice. "You're an ass, Hook, and a quite hopeless one. Suppose this chap is interested in the Los Angeles affair, as is probable. What then? He is a Continental operative. Is it likely that his organization doesn't know where he is? Don't you think they know he was coming up here? And don't they know as much about us? Chances are, as he does. There's no use killing him. That would only make matters worse. The thing to do is to tie him up and leave him here. His associates will hardly come looking for him until tomorrow, and that will give us all night to manage our disappearance." My gratitude went out to the British voice. Somebody was in my favor, at least to the extent of letting me live. I hadn't been feeling very cheerful these last few minutes. Somehow, the fact that I couldn't see these people who were deciding whether I was to live or die made my plight seem all the more desperate. I felt better now, though far from gay. I had confidence in the drawling British voice. It was the voice of a man who habitually carries his point. Hook, bellowing, "Let me tell you something, brother. That guy's going to be knocked off. That's flat. I'm taking no chances. You can jaw all you want to about it, but I'm looking out for my own neck, and it'll be a lot safer with that guy where he can't talk. That's flat. He's going to be knocked off." The feminine voice, disgustedly, "Oh, Hook, be reasonable." The British voice, still drawling, but dead cold. "There's no use reasoning with you, Hook. You've the instincts and the intellect of a troglodyte. There is only one sort of language that you understand, and I'm going to talk that language to you, my son. If you are tempted to do anything silly between now and the time of our departure, just say this to yourself 2 or 3 times. If he dies, I die. If he dies, I die. Say it as if it were out of the Bible, because it's that true." There followed a long space of silence, with a tenseness that made my not particularly sensitive scalp tingle. Beyond the portiere, I knew, 2 men were matching glances in a battle of wills, which might any instant become a physical struggle, and my chances of living were tied up in that battle. When, at last, a voice cut the silence, I jumped as if a gun had been fired, though the voice was low and smooth enough. It was the British voice, confidently victorious, and I breathed again. "We'll get the old people away first," the voice was saying. "You take charge of our guest, Hook. Tie him up neatly. But remember, no foolishness. Don't waste time questioning him. He'll lie. Tie him up while I get the bonds, and we'll be gone in less than half an hour." The portieres parted, and Hook came into the room, a scowling Hook whose freckles had a greenish tinge against the sallowness of his face. He pointed a revolver at me and spoke to the quarters. "He wants you." They got up and went into the next room, and for a while an indistinguishable buzzing of whispers came from that room. Hook, meanwhile, had stepped back to the doorway, still menacing me with his revolver, and pulled loose the plush ropes that were around the heavy curtains. Then he came around behind me and tied me securely to the high-backed chair, my arms to the chair's arms, my legs to the chair's legs, my body to the chair's back and seat. And he wound up by gagging me with the corner of a cushion that was too well stuffed for my comfort. The ugly man was unnecessarily rough throughout, but I was a lamb. He wanted an excuse for drilling me, and I wanted above all else that he should have no excuse. As he finished lashing me into place and stepped back to scowl at me, I heard the street door close softly, and then light footsteps ran back and forth overhead. Hook looked in the direction of those footsteps, and his little watery blue eyes grew cunning. "Elvira," he called softly. The portieres bulged, as if someone had touched them, and the musical, feminine voice came through. "What?" "Come here." "I'd better not. He wouldn't. Damn him!" Hook flared up. "Come here." She came into the room, and into the circle of light from the tall lamp, a girl in her early 20s, slender and lithe, and dressed for the street, except that she carried her hat in one hand. A white face beneath a bobbed mass of flame-colored hair. Smoke-gray eyes that were set too far apart for trustworthiness, though not for beauty, laughed at me, and her red mouth laughed at me, exposing the edges of little sharp animal teeth. She was beautiful as the devil, and twice as dangerous. She laughed at me, a fat man all trussed up with red plush rope, and with the corner of a green cushion in my mouth, and she turned to the ugly man. "What do you want?" He spoke in an undertone, with a furtive glance at the ceiling, above which soft steps still padded back and forth. "What say we shake him?" Her smoke-gray eyes lost their merriment and became hard and calculating. "There's 100,000 he's holding. A third of it's mine. You don't think I'm going to take a Mickey Finn on that, do you?" Footnote: take a Mickey Finn. Get cheated out of. A Mickey Finn is a drugged drink. End of footnote. Course not. Supposing we get the 100 grand. How? Leave it to me, kid. Leave it to me. If I swing it, will you go with me? You know I'll be good to you. She smiled contemptuously, I thought, but he seemed to like it. "You're whooping right you'll be good to me," she said. "But listen, Hook, we couldn't get away with it. Not unless you get him. I know him. I'm not running away with anything that belongs to him unless he is fixed so that he can't come after it." Hook moistened his lips and looked around the room at nothing. Apparently he didn't like the thought of tangling with the owner of the British drawl. But his desire for the girl was too strong for his fear of the other man. "I'll do it," he blurted. "I'll get him. Do you mean it, kid? If I get him, you'll go with me?" She held out her hand. "It's a bet," she said. And he believed her. His ugly face grew warm and red and utterly happy, and he took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders. In his place, I might have believed her myself. All of us have fallen for that sort of thing at one time or another. But sitting tied up on the sidelines, I knew that he'd have been better off playing with a gallon of nitro than this baby. She was dangerous. There was a rough time ahead for this Hook. "This is the lay," Hook began, and stopped, tongue-tied. Footnote: lay, line or trick. End of footnote. A step had sounded in the next room. Immediately, the British voice came through the portieres, and there was an edge of exasperation to the drawl now. "This is really too much. I can't—" He said "really" and "can't" leave for a moment without having things done all wrong. Now, just what got into you, Elvira, that you must go in and exhibit yourself to our detective friend?" Fear flashed into her smoke-gray eyes, and out again, and she spoke airily. "Don't be altogether yellow," she said. "Your precious neck can get along all right without so much guarding." The portieres parted, and I twisted my head around as far as I could get it for my first look at this man who was responsible for my still being alive. I saw a short, fat man, hatted and coated for the street, and carrying a tan traveling bag in one hand. Then his face came into the yellow circle of light, and I saw that it was a Chinese face, a short, fat Chinese, immaculately clothed in garments that were as British as his accent. "It isn't a matter of color," he told the girl, and I understood now the full sting of her jibe. "It's simply a matter of ordinary wisdom." His face was a round yellow mask, and his voice was the same emotionless drawl that I had heard before. But I knew that he was as surely under the girl's sway as the ugly man, or he wouldn't have let her taunt bring him into the room. But I doubted that she'd find this anglicized Oriental as easily handled as Hook. There was no particular need, the Chinese was still talking, for this chap to have seen any of us. He looked at me now for the first time, with little opaque eyes that were like two black seeds. It's quite possible that he didn't know any of us, even by description. This showing ourselves to him is the most arrant sort of nonsense. "Oh, hell, Ty," Hook blustered. "Quit your belly aching, will you? What's the diff? I'll knock him off and that takes care of that." The Chinese set down his tan bag and shook his head. "There will be no killing," he drawled, "or there will be quite a bit of killing. You don't mistake my meaning, do you, Hook?" Hook didn't. His Adam's apple ran up and down with the effort of his swallowing, and behind the cushion that was choking me, I thanked the yellow man again. Then this red-haired she-devil put her spoon in the dish. "Hook's always offering to do things that he has no intention of doing," she told the Chinese. Hook's ugly face blazed red at this reminder of his promise to get the Chinese, and he swallowed again, and his eyes looked as if nothing would have suited him better than an opportunity to crawl under something. But the girl had him. Her influence was stronger than his cowardice. He suddenly stepped close to the Chinese, and from his advantage of a full head in height, scowled down into the round yellow face that was as expressionless as a clock without hands. "Ty," the ugly man snarled, "you're done. I'm sick and tired of all this dog you put on, acting like you was a king or something. I've took all the lip I'm going to take from a chink. I'm going to—" He faltered, and his words faded away into silence. Ty looked up at him with eyes that were as hard and black and inhuman as two pieces of coal. Hook's lips twitched, and he flinched away a little. I stopped sweating. The yellow man had won again, but I had forgotten the red-haired she-devil. She laughed now, a mocking laugh that must have been like a knife to the ugly man. A bellow came from deep in his chest, and he hurled one big fist into the round, blank face of the yellow man. The force of the punch carried Ty all the way across the room and threw him on his side in one corner. But he had twisted his body around to face the ugly man, even as he went hurtling across the room. A gun was in his hand before he went down. And he was speaking before his legs had settled upon the floor, and his voice was a cultured British drawl. "Later," he was saying, "we will settle this thing that is between us. Just now, you will drop your pistol and stand very still while I get up." Hook's revolver, only half out of his pocket when the Oriental had covered him, thudded to the rug. He stood rigidly still while Ty got to his feet, and Hook's breath came out noisily, and each freckle stood ghastly out against the dirty, scared white of his face. I looked at the girl. There was contempt in the eyes with which she looked at Hook, but no disappointment. Then I made a discovery. Something had changed in the room near her. I shut my eyes and tried to picture that part of the room as it had been before the two men had clashed. Opening my eyes suddenly, I had the answer. On the table beside the girl had been a book and some magazines. They were gone now. Not 2 feet from the girl was the tan bag that Ty had brought into the room. Suppose the bag had held the bonds from the Los Angeles job that they had mentioned. It probably had. What then? It probably now held the book and magazines that had been on the table. The girl had stirred up the trouble between the two men to distract their attention, while she made a switch. Where would the loot be then? I didn't know, but I suspected that it was too bulky to be on the girl's slender person. Just beyond the table was a couch with a wide red cover that went all the way down to the floor. I looked from the couch to the girl. She was watching me, and her eyes twinkled with a flash of mirth as they met mine coming from the couch. The couch it was. By now, the Chinese had pocketed Hook's revolver and was talking to him. If I hadn't a dislike for murder, and if I didn't think that you will perhaps be of some value to Elvira and me in effecting our departure, I should certainly relieve us of the handicap of your stupidity now. But I'll give you one more chance. I would suggest, however, that you think carefully before you give way to any more of your violent impulses. He turned to the girl. Have you been putting foolish ideas in our Hook's head? She laughed. Nobody could put any kind in it. Perhaps you're right, he said, and then came over to test the lashings about my arms and body. Finding them satisfactory, he picked up the tan bag and held out the gun he had taken from the ugly man a few minutes before. Here's your revolver, Hook. Now try to be sensible. We may as well go now. The old man and his wife will do as they were told. They are on their way to a city that we needn't mention by name in front of our friend here, to wait for us and their share of the bonds. Needless to say, they will wait a long while. They are out of it now, but between ourselves, there must be no more treachery. If we're to get clear, we must help each other. According to the best dramatic rules, these folks should have made sarcastic speeches to me before they left, but they didn't. They passed me without even a farewell look, and went out of sight into the darkness of the hall. Suddenly, the Chinese was back in the room again, running tiptoe, an open knife in one hand, a gun in the other. This was the man I had been thanking for saving my life. He bent over me. The knife moved on my right side, and the rope that held that arm slackened its grip. I breathed again, and my heart went back to beating. Hook will be back, Ty whispered, and was gone. On the carpet, 3 feet in front of me, lay a revolver. The street door closed, and I was alone in the house for a while. You may believe that I spent that while struggling with the red plush ropes that bound me. Ty had cut one length, loosening my right arm somewhat and giving my body more play, but I was far from free. And his whispered, Hook will be back, was all the spur I needed to throw my strength against my bonds. I understood now why the Chinese had insisted so strongly upon my life being spared. I was the weapon with which Hook was to be removed. The Chinese figured that Hook would make some excuse as soon as they reached the street, slip back into the house, knock me off, and rejoin his Confederates. If he didn't do it on his own initiative, I suppose the Chinese would suggest it. So he had put a gun within reach, in case I could get loose, and had loosened my ropes as much as he could, not to have me free before he himself got away. This thinking was a side issue. I didn't let it slow up my efforts to get loose. The why wasn't important to me just now. The important thing was to have that revolver in my hand when the ugly man came into this room again. Just as the front door opened, I got my right arm completely free and plucked the strangling cushion from my mouth. The rest of my body was still held by the ropes, held loosely, but held. There was no time for more. I threw myself, chair and all, forward, breaking the fall with my free arm. The carpet was thick. I went down on my face with the heavy chair atop me, all doubled up any which way. But my right arm was free of the tangle, and my right hand grasped the gun. My left side, the wrong side, was toward the hall door. I twisted and squirmed and wrestled under the bulky piece of furniture that sat on my back. An inch, 2 inches, 6 inches I twisted. Another inch. Feet were at the hall door. Another inch. The dim light hit upon a man hurrying into the room, a glint of metal in his hand. I fired. He caught both hands to his belly, bent double, and slid out across the carpet. That was over, but that was far from being all. I wrenched at the plush ropes that held me, while my mind tried to sketch what lay ahead. The girl had switched the bonds, hiding them under the couch. There was no question of that. She had intended coming back for them before I had time to get free, but Hook had come back first, and she would have to change her plan. What more likely than that she would now tell the Chinese that Hook had made the switch? What then? There was only one answer. Tai would come back for the bonds. Both of them would come. Tai knew that I was armed now, but they had said that the bonds represented $100,000. That would be enough to bring them back. I kicked the last rope loose and scrambled to the couch. The bonds were beneath it. 4 thick bundles of Liberty bonds, done up with heavy rubber bands. I tucked them under one arm and went over to the man who was dying near the door. His gun was under one of his legs. I pulled it out, stepped over him, and went into the dark hall. Then I stopped to consider. The girl and the Chinese would split to tackle me. One would come in the front door and the other in the rear. That would be the safest way for them to handle me. My play, obviously, was to wait just inside one of those doors for them. It would be foolish for me to leave the house. That's exactly what they would be expecting at first, and they would be lying in ambush. Decidedly, my play was to lie low within sight of this front door and wait until one of them came through it, as one of them surely would, when they had tired of waiting for me to come out. Toward the street door, the hall was lighted with the glow that filtered through the glass from the streetlights. The stairway leading to the second story threw a triangular shadow across part of the hall, a shadow that was black enough for any purpose. I crouched low in this 3-cornered slice of night and waited. I had 2 guns, the one the Chinese had given me and the one I had taken from Hook. I had fired 1 shot. That would leave me 11 still to use, unless one of the weapons had been used since it was loaded. I broke the gun Tai had given me, and in the dark ran my fingers across the back of the cylinder. My fingers touched 1 shell under the hammer. Tai had taken no chances. He had given me 1 bullet, the bullet with which I had dropped Hook. I put that gun down on the floor and examined the one I had taken from Hook. It was empty. The Chinese had taken no chances at all. He had emptied Hook's gun before returning it to him after their quarrel. I was in a hole, alone, unarmed, in a strange house that would presently hold 2 who were hunting me, and that one of them was a woman didn't soothe me any. She was none the less deadly on that account. For a moment, I was tempted to make a dash for it. The thought of being put out in the street again was pleasant, but I put the idea away. That would be foolishness and plenty of it. Then I remembered the bonds under my arm. They would have to be my weapon, and if they were to serve me, they would have to be concealed. I slipped out of my triangular shadow and went up the stairs. Thanks to the streetlights, the upstairs rooms were not too dark for me to move around. Around and around I went through the rooms, hunting for a place to hide the Liberty bonds. But when suddenly a window rattled, as if from the draft created by the opening of an outside door somewhere, I still had the loot in my hands. There was nothing to do now but to chuck them out of a window and trust to luck. I grabbed a pillow from a bed, stripped off the white case, and dumped the bonds into it. Then I leaned out of an already open window and looked down into the night, searching for a desirable dumping place. I didn't want the bonds to land on an ash can or a pile of bottles, or anything that would make a racket. And, looking out of the window, I found a better hiding place. The window opened into a narrow court, on the other side of which was a house of the same sort as the one I was in. That house was of the same height as this one, with a flat tin roof that sloped down the other way. The roof wasn't far from me, not too far to chuck the pillowcase. I chucked it. It disappeared over the edge of the roof and crackled softly on the tin. If I had been a movie actor or something of the sort, I suppose I'd have followed the bonds. I suppose I'd have jumped from the sill, caught the edge of the roof with my fingers, swung a while, and then pulled myself up and away. But dangling in space doesn't appeal to me. I preferred to face the Chinese and the redhead. Then I did another not at all heroic thing. I turned on all the lights in the room, lighted a cigarette. We all like to pose a little now and then, and sat down on the bed to await my capture. I might have stalked my enemies through the dark house and possibly have nabbed them, but most likely I would simply have succeeded in getting myself shot, and I don't like to be shot. The girl found me. She came creeping up the hall, an automatic in each hand, hesitated for an instant outside the door, then came in on the jump. And when she saw me sitting peacefully on the side of the bed, her eyes snapped scornfully at me, as if I had done something mean. I suppose she thought I should have given her an opportunity to put lead in me. "I got him, Ty," she called, and the Chinese joined us. "What did Hook do with the bonds?" he asked point blank. I grinned into his round yellow face and led my ace. "Why don't you ask the girl?" His face showed nothing, but I imagined that his fat body stiffened a little within its fashionable British clothing. That encouraged me, and I went on with my little lie that was meant to stir things up. "Haven't you rapped to it?" I asked, "that they were fixing to ditch you?" "You dirty liar!" the girl screamed, and took a step toward me. Ty halted her with an imperative gesture. He stared through her with his opaque black eyes, and as he stared, the blood slid out of her face. She had this fat yellow man on her string right enough, but he wasn't exactly a harmless toy. "Sir, that's how it is?" he said slowly, to no one in particular. "So that's how it is." Then to me, "Where did they put the bonds?" The girl went close to him, and her words came out tumbling over each other. "Here's the truth of it, Ty, so help me God. I switched the stuff myself. Hook wasn't in it. I was going to run out on both of you. I stuck them under the couch downstairs, but they're not there now. That's the God's truth." He was eager to believe her, and her words had the ring of truth to them. And I knew that, in love with her as he was, he'd more readily forgive her treachery with the bonds than he would forgive her for planning to run off with Hook. So I made haste to stir things up again. The old-timer who said, "divide to conquer," or something of the sort, knew what he was talking about. "Part of that is right enough," I said. "She did stick the bonds under the couch, but Hook was in on it. They fixed it up between them while you were upstairs. He was to pick a fight with you, and during the argument, she was to make the switch, and that is exactly what they did." I had him. As she wheeled savagely toward me, he stuck the muzzle of an automatic in her side, a smart jab that checked the angry words she was hurling at me. "I'll take your guns, Elvira," he said, and took them. There was a purring deadliness in his voice that made her surrender them without a word. "Where are the bonds now?" he asked me. I grinned. "I'm not with you, Ty. I'm against you." He studied me with his little eyes that were like black seeds for a while, and I studied him, and I hoped that his studying was as fruitless as mine. "I don't like violence," he said slowly, "and I believe you are a sensible person. Let us traffic, my friend." "You name it," I suggested. "Gladly. As a basis for our bargaining, we will stipulate that you have hidden the bonds where they cannot be found by anyone else, and that I have you completely in my power, as the shilling shockers used to have it." Footnote: shilling shockers, British pulp stories that sold for a shilling. End of footnote. "Reasonable enough," I said. "Go on." "The situation, then, is what gamblers call a standoff. Neither of us has the advantage. As a detective, you want us, but we have you. As thieves, we want the bonds, but you have them. I offer you the girl in exchange for the bonds, and that seems to me an equitable offer. It will give me the bonds and a chance to get away. It will give you no small degree of success in your task as a detective. Hook is dead. You will have the girl. All that will remain is to find me and the bonds again, by no means a hopeless task. You will have turned a defeat into more than half of a victory, with an excellent chance to make it a complete one." "How do I know that you'll give me the girl?" He shrugged. "Naturally, there can be no guarantee. But knowing that she planned to desert me for the swine who lies dead below, you can't imagine that my feelings for her are the most friendly. 2, if I take her with me, she will want a share in the loot." I turned the layout over in my mind and looked at it from this side and that and the other. "This is the way it looks to me," I told him at last. "You aren't a killer. I'll come through alive no matter what happens. All right, why should I swap? You and the girl will be easier to find again than the bonds, and they are the most important part of the job anyway. I'll hold on to them and take my chances on finding you folks again. Yes, I'm playing it safe." And I meant it, for the time being at least. "No, I'm not a killer," he said, very softly. And he smiled the first smile I'd seen on his face. It wasn't a pleasant smile, and there was something in it that made you want to shudder. "But I am other things, perhaps, of which you haven't thought. But this talking is to no purpose. Elvira?" The girl, who had been standing a little to one side watching us, came obediently forward. "You will find sheets in one of the bureau drawers," he told her. "Tear 1 or 2 of them into strips, strong enough to tie up your friend securely." The girl went to the bureau. I wrinkled my head, trying to find a not too disagreeable answer to the question in my mind. The question that came first wasn't nice. Torture. Then a faint sound brought us all into tense motionlessness. The room we were in had 2 doors, one leading into the hall, the other into another bedroom. It was through the hall door that the faint sound had come, the sound of creeping feet. Swiftly, silently, Time moved backward to a position from which he could watch the hall door without losing sight of the girl and me, and the gun, poised like a live thing in his fat hand, was all the warning we needed to make no noise. The faint sound again, just outside the door. The gun in Ty's hand seemed to quiver with eagerness. Through the other door, the door that gave to the next room, popped Mrs. Quar, an enormous cocked revolver in her thin hand. "Let it go, you nasty heathen," she screeched. Ty dropped his pistol before he turned to face her, and he held his hands up high. all of which was very wise. Thomas Quar came through the hall door then. He also held a cocked revolver, the mate of his wife's, though in front of his bulk, his didn't look so enormously large. I looked at the old woman again, and found little of the friendly, fragile one who had poured tea and chatted about the neighbors. This was a witch if there ever was one, a witch of the blackest, most malignant sort. Her little faded eyes were sharp with ferocity, her withered lips were taut in a wolfish snarl, and her thin body fairly quivered with hate. "I knew it," she was shrilling. "I told Tom as soon as we got far enough away to think things over. I knew it was a frame-up. I knew this supposed detective was a pal of yours. I knew it was just a scheme to beat Thomas and me out of our chairs. Well, I'll show you, you yellow monkey, and the rest of you too. I'll show the whole caboodle of you. Where are them bonds? Where are they?" The Chinese had recovered his poise, if he had ever lost it. "Our stout friend can tell you, perhaps," he said. "I was about to extract the information from him when you so, dramatically arrived." "Thomas, for goodness sakes, don't stand there dreaming," she snapped at her husband, who, to all appearances, was still the same mild old man who had given me an excellent cigar. "Tie up this Chinaman. I don't trust him an inch, and I won't feel easy until he's tied up. Tie him up, and then we'll see what's to be done." I got up from my seat on the side of the bed and moved cautiously to a spot that I thought would be out of the line of fire if the thing I expected happened. Ty had dropped the gun that had been in his hand, but he hadn't been searched. The Chinese are a thorough people. If one of them carries a gun at all, he usually carries 2 or 3 or more. I remember picking up one in Oakland during the last Tong War who had 5 on him, 1 under each armpit, 1 on each hip, and 1 in his waistband. 1 gun had been taken from Ty, and if they tried to truss him up without frisking him, there was likely to be fireworks, so I moved off to one side. Fat Thomas Quar went phlegmatically up to the Chinese to carry out his wife's orders, and bungled the job perfectly. He put his bulk between Ty and the old woman's gun. Ty's hands moved. An automatic was in each. What's more, Ty ran true to racial form. When a Chinese shoots, he keeps on shooting until his gun is empty. When I yanked Ty over backward by his fat throat and slammed him to the door, his guns were still barking metal, and they clicked empty as I got a knee on one of his arms. I didn't take any chances. I worked on his throat until his eyes and tongue told me that he was out of things for a while. Then I looked around. Thomas Quar was huddled against the bed, plainly dead, with 3 round holes in his starched white chest, holes that were brown from the closeness of the gun that had put them there. Across the room, Mrs. Quar lay on her back. Her clothes had somehow settled in place around her fragile body, and death had given her once more the gentle, friendly look she had worn when I first saw her. One thin hand was on her bosom, covering, I found later, the 2 bullet holes that were there. The red-haired girl, Elvira, was gone. Presently Ty stirred, and after taking another gun from his clothes, I helped him sit up. He stroked his bruised throat with one fat hand and looked coolly around the room. "So this is how it came out?" he said. "Uh-huh. Where's Elvira? Got away, for the time being." He shrugged. "Well, you can call it a decidedly successful operation. The Quars and Hook dead, the bonds and I in your hands." "Not so bad," I admitted. "But will you do me a favor?" "If I may." "Tell me what the hell this is all about." "All about?" he asked, Exactly. From what you people have let me overhear, I gather that you pulled some sort of job in Los Angeles that netted you $100,000 worth of Liberty bonds. But I can't remember any recent job of that size down there. Why, that's preposterous, he said with what for him was almost wild-eyed amazement. Preposterous! Of course you know all about it. I do not. I was trying to find a young fellow named Fisher who left his Tacoma home in anger a week or two ago. His father wants him found on the quiet so that he can come down and try to talk him into going home again. I was told that I might find Fisher in this block of Turk Street, and that's what brought me here. He didn't believe me. He never believed me. He went to the gallows, thinking me a liar. When I got out into the street again, and Turk Street was a lovely place when I came free into it after my evening in that house, I bought a newspaper that told me most of what I wanted to know. A boy of 20, a messenger in the employ of a Los Angeles stock and bond house, had disappeared 2 days before, while on his way to a bank with a wad of Liberty bonds. That same night, this boy and a slender girl with bobbed red hair had registered at a hotel in Fresno as J. M. Reardon and wife. The next morning, the boy had been found in his room, murdered. The girl was gone. The bonds were gone. That much the paper told me. During the next few days, digging up a little here and a little there, I succeeded in piecing together most of the story. The Chinese, whose full name was Tai Chun Tao, had been the brains of the mob. Their game had been a variation of the always reliable Badger game. Tai selected the victims, and he must have been a good judge of humans, for he seems never to have picked a bloomer. Footnote: Australian for mistakes. End of footnote. He would pick out some youth who was messenger or runner for a bank or broker, one who carried either cash or negotiable securities in large quantities around the city. The girl, Elvira, would then make this lad, get him all fussed up over her, which shouldn't have been very hard for her, and then lead him gently around to running away with her and whatever he could grab in the way of his employer's bonds or currency. Wherever they spent the first night of their flight, their hook would appear, foaming at the mouth, and loaded for bear. The girl would plead and tear her hair and so forth, trying to keep Hook, in his role of irate husband, from butchering the youth. Finally, she would succeed. And, in the end, the youth would find himself without either girl or the fruits of his thievery. Sometimes he had surrendered to the police. 2, we found, had committed suicide. The Los Angeles lad had been built of tougher stuff than the others. He had put up a fight, and Hook had had to kill him. You can measure the girl's skill in her end of the game by the fact that not one of the half-dozen youths who had been trimmed had said the least thing to implicate her, and some of them had gone to great trouble to keep her out of it. The house in Turk Street had been the mob's retreat, and that it might be always a safe one, they had not worked their game in San Francisco. Hook and the girl were supposed by the neighbors to be the Quar's son and daughter, and Tai was the Chinese cook. The Quar's benign and respectable appearances had also come in handy when the mob had securities to be disposed of. The Chinese went to the gallows. We threw out the widest and finest meshed of dragnets for the red-haired girl, and we turned up girls with bobbed red hair by the scores. But the girl Elvira was not among them. I promised myself that someday. Girl with the Silver Eyes, by Dashiell Hammett, author of 1 Hour, The House in Turk Street, etc. Mr. Hammett has written some lively and unusual tales about his realistic detective from the Continental Detective Agency, whose name has never been disclosed. But for action, shrewd detective work, sheer interest, and surprise, his latest, herewith, surpasses them all. Complete detective novelette. A bell jangled me into wakefulness. I rolled to the edge of my bed and reached for the telephone. The neat voice of the old man, the Continental Detective Agency's San Francisco manager, came to my ears. "Sorry to disturb you, but you'll have to go up to the Glenton Apartments on Leavenworth Street. A man named Burke Pangburn, who lives there, phoned me a few minutes ago, asking to have someone sent up to see him at once. He seemed rather excited. Will you take care of it? See what he wants?" I said I would, and yawning, stretching, and cursing Pangburn, whoever he was, got my fat body out of pajamas and into street clothes. The man who had disturbed my Sunday morning sleep, I found when I reached the Glenton, was a slim, white-faced person of about 25, with big brown eyes that were red-rimmed just now from either sleeplessness or crying or both. His long brown hair was rumpled when he opened the door to admit me, and he wore a mauve dressing robe spotted with big jade parrots over wine-colored silk pajamas. The room into which he led me resembled an auctioneer's establishment just before the sale, or maybe one of these alley tea rooms. Fat blue vases, crooked red vases, lanky yellow vases, vases of various shapes and colors, marble statuettes, ebony statuettes, statuettes of any material, lanterns, lamps, and candlesticks, draperies, hangings, and rugs of all sorts, odds and ends of furniture that were all somehow queerly designed, peculiar pictures hung here and there in unexpected places. A hard room to feel comfortable in. "My fiancée," he began immediately, in a high-pitched voice that was within a notch of hysteria, "has disappeared. Something has happened to her. Foul play of some horrible sort. I want you to find her, to save her from this terrible thing that—" I followed him this far and then gave it up. A jumble of words came out of his mouth. Spirited away, mysterious something, lured into a trap. But they were too disconnected for me to make anything out of them. So I stopped trying to understand him and waited for him to babble himself empty of words. I have heard ordinarily reasonable men, under stress of excitement, run on even more crazily than this wild-eyed youth. But his dress, the parroted robe and gay pajamas, and his surroundings, this deliriously furnished room, gave him too theatrical a setting, made his words sound utterly unreal. He himself, when normal, should have been a rather nice-looking lad. His features were well-spaced, and, though his mouth and chin were a little uncertain, his broad forehead was good. But standing there listening to the occasional melodramatic phrase that I could pick out of the jumbled noises he was throwing at me, I thought that instead of parrots on his robe, he should have had cuckoos. Presently, he ran out of language, and was holding his long, thin hands out to me in an appealing gesture, saying, "Will you?" over and over. "Will you? Will you?" I nodded soothingly, and noticed that tears were on his thin cheeks. "Suppose we begin at the beginning," I suggested, sitting down carefully on a carved bench affair that didn't look any too strong. "Yes, yes." He was standing legs apart in front of me, running his fingers through his hair. "The beginning. I had a letter from her every day until—" "That's not the beginning," I objected. "Who is she? What is she?" "She's Jean Delano," he exclaimed in surprise at my ignorance, "and she is my fiancée, and now she is gone, and I know that—" The phrases "victim of foul play," "into a trap," and so on, began to flow hysterically out again. Finally, I got him quieted down, and, sandwiched in between occasional emotional outbursts, got a story out of him that amounted to this. This Burke Pangburn was a poet. About 2 months before, he had received a note from a Jean Delano, forwarded from his publishers, praising his latest book of rhymes. Jean Delano happened to live in San Francisco, too, though she hadn't known that he did. He had answered her note and had received another. After a little of this, they met. If she really was as beautiful as he claimed, then he wasn't to be blamed for falling in love with her. But whether or not she was really beautiful, he thought she was, and he had fallen hard. This Delano girl had been living in San Francisco for only a little while, and when the poet met her, she was living alone in an Ashbury Avenue apartment. He did not know where she came from or anything about her former life. He suspected, from certain indefinite suggestions and peculiarities of conduct which he couldn't put in words, that there was a cloud of some sort hanging over the girl, that neither her past nor her present were free from difficulties. But he hadn't the least idea what those difficulties might be. He hadn't cared. He knew absolutely nothing about her, except that she was beautiful, and he loved her, and she had promised to marry him. Then, on the 3rd of the month, exactly 21 days before this Sunday morning, the girl had suddenly left San Francisco. He had received a note from her by messenger. This note, which he showed me after I had insisted point blank on seeing it, read, "Burke, love, have just received a wire and must go east on next train. Tried to get you on the phone but couldn't. Will write you as soon as I know what my address will be. If anything." These 2 words were erased and could be read only with great difficulty. "Love me until I'm back with you forever. Your Jean." 9 days later, he had received another letter from her from Baltimore, Maryland. This one, which I had a still harder time getting a look at, read, "Dearest poet, it seems like 2 years since I have seen you, and I have a fear that it's going to be between 1 and 2 months before I see you again. I can't tell you now, beloved, about what brought me here. There are things that can't be written. But as soon as I'm back with you, I shall tell you the whole wretched story. If anything should happen, I mean to me, you'll go on loving me forever, won't you, beloved? But that's foolish. Nothing is going to happen. I'm just off the train and tired from traveling. Tomorrow I shall write you a long, long letter to make up for this. My address here is 215 North Stricker Street. Please, mister, at least 1 letter a day. Your own, Jean." For 9 days he had had a letter from her each day, with 2 on Monday to make up for the none on Sunday, and then her letters had stopped. And the daily letters he had sent to the address she gave, 215 North Stricker Street, had begun to come back to him, marked "Not Known." He had sent a telegram, and the telegraph company had informed him that its Baltimore office had been unable to find a Jean Delano at the North Stricker Street address. For 3 days he had waited, expecting hourly to hear from the girl, and no word had come. Then he had bought a ticket for Baltimore. But he wound up. "I was afraid to go. I know she's in some sort of trouble. I can feel that. But I'm a silly poet. I can't deal with mysteries. Either I would find nothing at all, or if by luck I did stumble on the right track, the probabilities are that I would only muddle things, add fresh complications, perhaps endanger her life still further. I can't go blundering at it in that fashion, without knowing whether I am helping or harming her. It's a task for an expert in that sort of thing. So I thought of your agency. You'll be careful, won't you? It may be, I don't know, that she won't want assistance. It may be that you can help her without her knowing anything about it. You are accustomed to that sort of thing. You can do it, can't you?" 2. I turned the job over and over in my mind before answering him. The two great bugaboos of a reputable detective agency are the persons who bring in a crooked plan or a piece of divorce work all dressed up in the garb of a legitimate operation, and the irresponsible person who is laboring under wild and fanciful delusions, who wants a dream run out. This poet, sitting opposite me now, twining his long white fingers nervously together, was, I thought, sincere, but I wasn't so sure of his sanity. "Mr. Pangburn," I said, after a while, "I'd like to handle this thing for you, but I'm not sure that I can. The Continental is rather strict, and while I believe this thing is on the level, still, I am only a hired man and have to go by the rules. Now, if you could give us the endorsement of some firm or person of standing, a reputable lawyer, for instance, or any legally responsible party, we'd be glad to go ahead with the work. Otherwise, I am afraid—" "But I know she's in danger," he broke out. "I know that, and I can't be advertising her plight, airing her affairs to everyone. I'm sorry, but I can't touch it unless you can give me some such endorsement." I stood up. "But you can find plenty of detective agencies that aren't so particular." His mouth worked like a small boy's, and he caught his lower lip between his teeth. For a moment I thought he was going to burst into tears, but instead he said slowly, "I dare say you are right. Suppose I refer you to my brother-in-law, Roy Axford. Will his word be sufficient?" "Yes." Roy Axford, R.F. Axford, was a mining man who had a finger in at least half of the big business enterprises of the Pacific Coast, and his word on anything was commonly considered good enough for anybody. "If you can get in touch with him now," I said, "and arrange for me to see him today, I can get started without much delay." Pangburn crossed the room and dug a telephone out from among a heap of his ornaments. Within a minute or two, he was talking to someone whom he called Rita. "Is Roy home?" "Will he be home this afternoon?" "No. You can give him a message for me, though. Tell him I'm sending a gentleman up to see him this afternoon on a personal matter, personal with me, and that I'll be very grateful if he'll do what I want. Yes. You'll find out, Rita. It isn't a thing to talk about over the phone." "Yes, thanks." He pushed the telephone back into its hiding place and turned to me. "He'll be home until 2 o'clock. Tell him what I told you, and if he seems doubtful, have him call me up. You'll have to tell him the whole thing. He doesn't know anything at all about Miss Delano." "All right. Before I go, I want a description of her." "She's beautiful," he exclaimed. "The most beautiful woman in the world." "That would look nice on a reward circular." "That isn't exactly what I want," I told him. "How old is she? 22, height, about 5 feet 8 inches, or possibly 9, slender, medium, or plump. She's inclined towards slenderness, but she—" There was a note of enthusiasm in his voice that made me fear he was about to make a speech, so I cut him off with another question. "What color hair?" "Brown, so dark that it's almost black, and it's soft and thick, and yes, long or bobbed?" "Long and thick." "And what color eyes?" "You've seen shadows on polished silver when—" I wrote down gray eyes and hurried on with the interrogation. "Complexion?" "Perfect." "Uh-huh. But is it light or dark or florid or sallow or what?" "Fair." "Face oval or square or long and thin or what shape?" "Oval." "What shaped nose?" "Large, small, turned up." "Small and regular." There was a touch of indignation in his voice. "How did she dress? Fashionably? And did she favor bright or quiet colors?" "Beaut—" And then, as I opened my mouth to head him off, he came down to earth with, "Very quietly, usually dark blues and browns." "What jewelry did she wear?" "I've never seen her wear any." "Any scars or moles?" The horrified look on his white face urged me on to give him a full shot. "Or warts or deformities that you know?" He was speechless, but he managed to shake his head. "Have you a photograph of her?" "Yes, I'll show you." He bounded to his feet, wound his way through the room's excessive furnishings, and out through a curtained doorway. Immediately he was back with a large photograph in a carved ivory frame. It was one of these artistic photographs, a thing of shadows and hazy outlines, not much good for identification purposes. She was beautiful, right enough, but that meant nothing. That's the purpose of an artistic photograph. "This the only one you have?" "Yes. I'll have to borrow it. But I'll get it back to you as soon as I have my copies made." "No, no," he protested against having his ladylove's face given to a lot of gumshoes. "That would be terrible." I finally got it, but it cost me more words than I like to waste on an incidental. "I want to borrow a couple of her letters or something in her writing, too," I said. "For what?" "To have photostatic copies made. Handwriting specimens come in handy, give you something to go over hotel registers with. Then, even if going under fictitious names, people now and then write notes and make memorandums." We had another battle, out of which I came with 3 envelopes and 2 meaningless sheets of paper, all bearing the girl's angular writing. "She have much money?" I asked, when the disputed photograph and handwriting specimens were safely tucked away in my pocket. "I don't know. It's not the sort of thing that one would pry into. She wasn't poor. That is, she didn't have to practice any petty economies, but I haven't the faintest idea, either as to the amount of her income or its source. She had an account at the Golden Gate Trust Company, but naturally I don't know anything about its size. Many friends here? That's another thing I don't know. I think she knew a few people here, but I don't know who they were. You see, when we were together, we never talked about anything but ourselves. You know what I mean. There was nothing we were interested in but each other. We were simply—" "Can't you even make a guess at where she came from? Who she was?" "No. Those things didn't matter to me. She was Jean Delano, and that was enough for me." "Did you and she ever have any financial interests in common? I mean, was there ever any transaction in money or other valuables in which both of you were interested?" What I meant, of course, was, had she got into him for a loan, or had she sold him something, or got money out of him in any other way? He jumped to his feet and his face went fog gray. Then he sat down again, slumped down, and blushed scarlet. "Pardon me," he said thickly. "You didn't know her, and of course you must look at the thing from all angles. No, there was nothing like that. I'm afraid you are going to waste time if you are going to work on the theory that she was an adventuress. There was nothing like that. She was a girl, with something terrible hanging over her, something that called her to Baltimore suddenly, something that has taken her away from me. Money? What could money have to do with it? I love her." 3. R.F. Axford received me in an office-like room in his Russian Hill residence, a big blond man whose 48 or 9 years had not blurred the outlines of an athlete's body, a big, full-blooded man with the manner of one whose self-confidence is complete and not altogether unjustified. "What's our Burke been up to now?" he asked amusedly when I told him who I was. His voice was a pleasant, vibrant bass. I didn't give him all the details. "He was engaged to marry a Jean Delano who went east about 3 weeks ago and then suddenly disappeared. He knows very little about her, thinks something has happened to her, and wants her found." Again? His shrewd blue eyes twinkled. "And to a Jean this time. She's the 5th within a year, to my knowledge, and no doubt I missed 1 or 2 who were current while I was in Hawaii. But where do I come in?" I asked him for responsible endorsement. I think he's all right, but he isn't, in the strictest sense, a responsible person. He referred me to you. "You're right about his not being, in the strictest sense, a responsible person." The big man screwed up his eyes and mouth in thought for a moment. Then, "Do you think that something has really happened to the girl, or is Burke imagining things?" "I don't know. I thought it was a dream at first, but in a couple of her letters there are hints that something was wrong." "You might go ahead and find her then," Axford said. "I don't suppose any harm will come from letting him have his Jean back. It will at least give him something to think about for a while." "I have your word for it, then, Mr. Axford, that there will be no scandal or anything of the sort connected with the affair?" "Assuredly. Burke is all right, you know. It's simply that he is spoiled. He has been in rather delicate health all his life, and then he has an income that suffices to keep him modestly, with a little over to bring out books of verse and buy doodaws for his rooms. He takes himself a little too solemnly, is too much the poet, but he's sound at bottom." "I'll go ahead with it, then," I said, getting up. "By the way, the girl has an account at the Golden Gate Trust Company, and I'd like to find out as much about it as possible, especially where her money came from. Clement, the cashier, is a model of caution when it comes to giving out information about depositors. If you could put in a word for me, it would make my way smoother." "Be glad to." He wrote a couple of lines across the back of a card and gave it to me, and promising to call on him if I needed further assistance, I left. 4. I telephoned Pangburn that his brother-in-law had given the job his approval. I sent a wire to the agency's Baltimore branch, giving what information I had. Then I went up to Ashbury Avenue, to the apartment house in which the girl had lived. The manager, an immense Mrs. Clute in rustling black, knew little if any more about the girl than Pangburn. The girl had lived there for 2.5 months. She had had occasional callers, but Pangburn was the only one that the manager could describe to me. The girl had given up the apartment on the 3rd of the month, saying that she had been called east, and she had asked the manager to hold her mail until she sent her new address. 10 days later, Mrs. Clute had received a card from the girl instructing her to forward her mail to 215 North Stricker Street, Baltimore, Maryland. There had been no mail to forward. The single thing of importance that I learned at the apartment house was that the girl's 2 trunks had been taken away by a green transfer truck. Green was the color used by one of the city's largest transfer companies. I went then to the office of this transfer company and found a friendly clerk on duty. A detective, if he is wise, takes pains to make and keep as many friends as possible among transfer company, express company, and railroad employees. I left the office with a memorandum of the transfer company's check numbers and the ferry baggage room to which the 2 trunks had been taken. At the ferry building with this information, it didn't take me many minutes to learn that the trunks had been checked to Baltimore. I sent another wire to the Baltimore branch giving the railroad check numbers. Sunday was well into night by this time, so I knocked off and went home. 5. Half an hour before the Golden Gate Trust Company opened for business the next morning, I was inside, talking to Clement, the cashier. All the traditional caution and conservatism of baggers rolled together wouldn't be 1, 2, 3 to the amount usually displayed by this plump, white-haired old man. But one look at Axford's card with, "Please give the bearer all possible assistance," inked across the back of it, made Clement even eager to help me. "You have had an account here in the name of Jean Delano," I said. "I'd like to know as much as possible about it, to whom she drew checks and to what amounts, but especially all you can tell me about where her money came from." He stabbed one of the pearl buttons on his desk with a pink finger, and a lad with polished yellow hair oozed silently into the room. The cashier scribbled with a pencil on a piece of paper and gave it to the noiseless youth, who disappeared. Presently he was back, laying a handful of papers on the cashier's desk. Clement looked through the papers and then up at me. "Miss Delano was introduced here by Mr. Burke Pangburn on the 6th of last month, and opened an account with $850 in cash. She made the following deposits after that: $400 on the 10th, $250 on the 21st, $300 on the 26th, $200 on the 30th, and $20,000 on the 2nd of this month. All of these deposits, except the last, were made with cash. The last one was a check, which I have here." He handed it to me, a Golden Gate Trust Company check. "Pay to the order of Jean Delano, $20,000. Signed, Burke Pangburn." It was dated the 2nd of the month. "Burke Pangburn?" I exclaimed, a little stupidly. "Was it usual for him to draw checks to that amount? I think not, but we shall see." He stabbed the pearl button again, ran his pencil across another slip of paper, and the youth with the polished yellow hair made a noiseless entrance, exit, entrance, and exit. The cashier looked through the fresh batch of papers that had been brought to him. On the 1st of the month, Mr. Pangburn deposited $20,000, a check against Mr. Axford's account here. "Now, how about Miss Delano's withdrawals?" I asked. He picked up the papers that had to do with her account again. "Her statement and canceled checks for last month haven't been delivered to her yet. Everything is here. A check for $85 to the order of H.K. Clute on the 15th of last month, one to cash for $300 on the 20th, and another of the same kind for $100 on the 25th. Both of these checks were apparently cashed here by her. On the 3rd of this month, she closed out her account with a check to her own order for $21,515, and that check was cashed here by her. I lighted a cigarette and let these figures drift around in my head. None of them, except those that were fixed to Pangborn's and Axford's signatures, seemed to be of any value to me. The Clute check, the only one the girl had drawn in anyone else's favor, had almost certainly been for rent. "This is the way of it," I summed up aloud. On the 1st of the month, Pangborn deposited Axford's check for $20,000. The next day, he gave a check to that amount to Miss Delano, which she deposited. On the following day, she closed her account, taking between $21,000 and $22,000 in currency. "Exactly," the cashier said. 6. Before going up to the Glenton apartments to find out why Pangborn hadn't come clean with me about the $20,000, I dropped in at the agency to see if any word had come from Baltimore. One of the clerks had just finished decoding a telegram. It read, "Baggage arrived, Mount Royal Station on 8th. Taken away same day. Unable to trace. 215 North Stricker Street is Baltimore Orphan Asylum. Girl not known there. Continuing our efforts to find her." Footnote, Baltimore Orphan Asylum, across the street from the house where Hammett grew up. End of footnote. The old man came in from luncheon as I was leaving. I went back into his office with him for a couple of minutes. "Did you see Pangborn?" he asked. "Yes. I'm working on his job now, but I think it's a bust." "What is it?" "Pangborn is R.F. Axford's brother-in-law. He met a girl a couple of months ago and fell for her. She sizes up as a worker. He doesn't know anything about her. The 1st of the month, he got $20,000 from his brother-in-law and passed it over to the girl. She blew, telling him she had been called to Baltimore and giving him a phony address that turns out to be an orphan asylum. She sent her trunks to Baltimore and sent him some letters from there, but a friend could have taken care of the baggage and could have remailed her letters for her. Of course, she would have needed a ticket to check the trunks on, but in a $20,000 game that would be a small expense. Pangborn held out on me. He didn't tell me a word about the money. Ashamed of being easy pickings, I reckon. I'm going to the bat with him on it now." The old man smiled his mild smile that might mean anything, and I left. 7. 10 minutes of ringing Pangborn's bell brought no answer. The elevator boy told me he thought Pangborn hadn't been in all night. I put a note in his box and went down to the railroad company's offices, where I arranged to be notified if an unused Baltimore-San Francisco ticket was turned in for redemption. That done, I went up to the Chronicle office and searched the files for weather conditions during the past month, making a memorandum of 4 dates upon which it had rained steadily day and night. I carried my memorandum to the offices of the 3 largest taxicab companies. That was a trick that had worked well for me before. The girl's apartment was some distance from the streetcar line, and I was counting upon her having gone out, or having had a caller, on one of those rainy dates. In either case, it was very likely that she, or her caller, had left in a taxi in preference to walking through the rain to the car line. The taxicab company's daily records would show any calls from her address and the fare's destinations. The ideal trick, of course, would have been to have the records searched for the full extent of the girl's occupancy of the apartment. But no taxicab company would stand for having that amount of work thrust upon them, unless it was a matter of life and death. It was difficult enough for me to persuade them to turn clerks loose on the 4 days I had selected. I called up Pangburn again after I left the last taxicab office, but he was not at home. I called up Axford's residence, thinking that the poet might have spent the night there, but was told that he had not. Late that afternoon, I got my copies of the girl's photograph and handwriting, and put one of each in the mail for Baltimore. Then I went around to the 3 taxicab companies' offices and got my reports. 2 of them had nothing for me. The third's records showed 2 calls from the girl's apartment. On one rainy afternoon, a taxi had been called, and 1 passenger had been taken to the Glenton apartments. That passenger obviously was either the girl or Pangburn. At 12:30 one night, another call had come in, and this passenger had been taken to the Marquis Hotel. The driver, who had answered this second call, remembered it indistinctly when I questioned him, but he thought that his fare had been a man. I let the matter rest there for the time. The Marquis isn't a large hotel as San Francisco hotels go, but it is too large to make canvassing its guests for the one I wanted practicable. I spent the evening trying to reach Pangburn, with no success. At 11 o'clock, I called up Axford and asked him if he had any idea where I might find his brother-in-law. "Haven't seen him for several days," the millionaire said. "He was supposed to come up for dinner last night, but didn't. My wife tried to reach him by phone a couple times today, but couldn't." 8. The next morning I called Pangburn's apartment before I got out of bed, and got no answer. Then I telephoned Axford, and made an appointment for 10 o'clock at his office. "I don't know what he's up to now," Axford said good-naturedly, when I told him that Pangburn had apparently been away from his apartment since Sunday. "And I suppose there's small chance of guessing. Our Burke is nothing if not erratic. How are you progressing with your search for the damsel in distress?" "Far enough to convince me that she isn't in a whole lot of distress. She got $20,000 from your brother-in-law the day before she vanished." $20,000 from Burke? She must be a wonderful girl. But wherever did he get that much money? "From you." Axford's muscular body straightened in his chair. "From me?" "Yes, your check." "He did not." There was nothing argumentative in his voice. It simply stated a fact. "You didn't give him a check for $20,000 on the first of the month?" "No." "Then," I suggested, "perhaps we'd better take a run over to the Golden Gate Trust Company." 10 minutes later, we were in Clement's office. "I'd like to see my canceled checks," Axford told the cashier. The youth with the polished yellow hair brought them in presently, a thick wad of them, and Axford ran rapidly through them until he found the one he wanted. He studied that one for a long while, and when he looked up at me, he shook his head slowly, but with finality. "I've never seen it before." Clement mopped his head with a white handkerchief and tried to pretend that he wasn't burning up with curiosity and fears that his bank had been gypped. The millionaire turned the check over and looked at the endorsement. "Deposited by Burke," he said, in the voice of one who talks while he thinks of something entirely different. "On the 1st. "Could we talk to the teller who took in the $20,000 check that Miss Delano deposited?" I asked Clement. He pressed one of his desk's pearl buttons with a fumbling pink finger, and in a minute or two a little sallow man with a hairless head came in. Do you remember taking a check for $20,000 from Miss Jean Delano a few weeks ago? I asked him. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Perfectly. Just what do you remember about it? Well, sir, Miss Delano came to my window with Mr. Burke Pangburn. It was his check. I thought it was a large check for him to be drawing, but the bookkeeper said he had enough money in his account to cover it. They stood there, Miss Delano and Mr. Pangburn, talking and laughing while I entered the deposit in her book, and then they left, and that was all. This check, Axford said slowly, after the teller had gone back to his cage, is a forgery, but I shall make it good, of course. That ends the matter, Mr. Clement, and there must be no more to do about it. Certainly, Mr. Axford, certainly. Clement was all enormously relieved smiles and head noddings, with this $20,000 load lifted from his bank's shoulders. Axford and I left the bank then, and got into his coupe, in which we had come from his office. But he did not immediately start the engine. He sat for a while, staring at the traffic of Montgomery Street with unseeing eyes. I want you to find Burke, he said presently, and there was no emotion of any sort in his bass voice. I want you to find him without risking the least whisper of scandal. If my wife knew of all this, she mustn't know. She thinks her brother is a choice morsel. I want you to find him for me. The girl doesn't matter anymore, but I suppose that where you find one, you will find the other. I'm not interested in the money, and I don't want you to make any special attempt to recover that. It could hardly be done, I'm afraid, without publicity. I want you to find Burke before he does something else. If you want to avoid the wrong kind of publicity, I said, your best bet is to spread the right kind first. Let's advertise him as missing. Fill the papers up with his pictures and so forth. They'll play him up strong. He's your brother-in-law, and he's a poet. We can say that he has been ill. You told me that he had been in delicate health all his life, and that we fear he has dropped dead somewhere or is suffering under some mental derangement. There will be no necessity of mentioning the girl or the money, and our explanation may keep people, especially your wife, from guessing the truth when the fact that he is missing leaks out. It's bound to leak out somehow. He didn't like my idea at first, but I finally won him over. We went up to Pangburn's apartment then, easily securing admittance on Axford's explanation that we had an engagement with him and would wait there for him. I went through the rooms inch by inch, prying into each hole and hollow and crack, reading everything that was written anywhere, even down to his manuscripts, and I found nothing that threw any light on his disappearance. I helped myself to his photographs, pocketing 5 of the dozen or more that were there. Axford did not think that any of the poet's bags or trunks were missing from the pack room. I did not find his Golden Gate Trust Company deposit book. I spent the rest of the day loading the newspapers up with what we wished them to have, and they gave my ex-client one grand spread, first-page stuff with photographs and all possible trimmings. Anyone in San Francisco who didn't know that Burke Pangburn, brother-in-law of R.F. Axford, and author of Sand Patches and Other Verse, was missing, either couldn't read or wouldn't. 9. This advertising brought results. By the following morning, reports were rolling in from all directions, from dozens of people who had seen the missing poet in dozens of places. A few of these reports looked promising, or at least possible, but the majority were ridiculous on their faces. I came back to the agency from running out one that had, until run out, looked good, to find a note on my desk asking me to call up Axford. Can you come down to my office now? he asked, when I got him on the wire. There was a lad of 21 or 2 with Oxford when I was ushered into his office, a narrow-chested, dandified lad of the sporting clerk type. "This is Mr. Fall, one of my employees," Oxford told me. "He says he saw Burke Sunday night." "Where?" I asked Fall. "Going into a roadhouse near Half Moon Bay." "Sure it was him. Absolutely. I've seen him come in here to Mr. Oxford's office to know him. It was him all right." "How did you come to see him?" "I was coming up from further down the shore with some friends, and we stopped in at the roadhouse to get something to eat. As we were leaving, a car drove up, and Mr. Pangburn and a girl or woman, I didn't notice her particularly, got out and went inside. I didn't think anything of it until I saw in the paper last night that he hadn't been seen since Sunday. So then I thought to myself that, what roadhouse was this? I cut in, not being interested in his mental processes. "The White Shack." "About what time?" "Somewhere between 11:30 and midnight, I guess." "He see you?" "No. I was already in our car when he drove up. I don't think he'd know me anyway." "What did the woman look like?" "I don't know. I didn't see her face, and I can't remember how she was dressed, or even if she was short or tall." That was all Fall could tell me. We shooed him out of the office, and I used Axford's telephone to call up Wap Healy's dive in North Beach and leave word that when Porky Grout came in, he was to call up Jack. That was a standing arrangement by which I got word to Porky whenever I wanted to see him, without giving anybody a chance to tumble to the connection between us. "Know the White Shack?" I asked Axford when I was through phoning. "I know where it is, but I don't know anything about it." "Well, it's a tough hole, run by Tin Star Joplin, an ex-Yag who invested his winnings in the place when Prohibition made the roadhouse game good. He makes more money now than he ever heard of in his piking, safe-ripping days. Retailing liquor is a sideline with him. His real profit comes from acting as a relay station for the booze that comes through Half Moon Bay for points beyond. And the dope is that half the booze put ashore by the Pacific Rum Fleet is put ashore in Half Moon Bay." Footnotes: Yag, burglar. Piking, itinerant. End of footnotes. The White Shack is a tough hole, and it's no place for your brother-in-law to be hanging around. I can't go down there myself without stirring things up. Joplin and I are old friends. But I've got a man I could put in there for a few nights. Pangburn may be a regular visitor, or he may even be staying there. He wouldn't be the first one Joplin had ever let hide out there. I'll put this man of mine in the place for a week anyway, and see what he can find. "It's all in your hands," Axford said. "Find Burke without scandal. That's all I ask." 10. From Axford's office I went straight to my rooms, left the outer door unlocked, and sat down to wait for Porky Grout. I had waited an hour and a half when he pushed the door open and came in. "Lo, how's Trex?" He swaggered to a chair, leaned back in it, put his feet on the table, and reached for a pack of cigarettes that lay there. That was Porky Grout, a pasty-faced man in his 30s, neither large nor small, always dressed flashily, even if sometimes dirtily, and trying to hide an enormous cowardice behind a swaggering carriage, a blustering habit of speech, and an exaggerated pretense of self-assurance. But I had known him for 3 years, so now I crossed the room and pushed his feet roughly off the table, almost sending him over backward. "What's the idea?" He came to his feet, crouching and snarling. "Where do you get that stuff? Do you want a smack in the—" I took a step toward him. He sprang away, across the room. I didn't mean nothing. I was only kiddin'." "Shut up and sit down," I advised him. I had known this porky grout for 3 years, and had been using him for nearly that long, and I didn't know a single thing that could be said in his favor. He was a coward. He was a liar. He was a thief and a hophead. He was a traitor to his kind, and if not watched, to his employers, a nice bird to deal with. But detecting is a hard business, and you use whatever tools come to hand. This porky was an effective tool if handled right, which meant keeping your hand on his throat all the time and checking up every piece of information he brought in. His cowardice was, for my purpose, his greatest asset. It was notorious throughout the criminal coast, and though nobody, crook or not, could possibly think him a man to be trusted, nevertheless, he was not actually distrusted. Most of his fellows thought him too much the coward to be dangerous. They thought he would be afraid to betray them, afraid of the summary vengeance that crookdom visits upon the squealer. But they didn't take into account Porky's gift for convincing himself that he was a lion-hearted fellow, when no danger was near. So he went freely where he desired, and where I sent him, and brought me otherwise unobtainable bits of information upon matters in which I was interested. For nearly 3 years I had used him with considerable success, paying him well and keeping him under my heel. Informant was the polite word that designated him in my reports. The underworld has even less lovely names than the common stool pigeon to denote his kind. "I have a job for you," I told him, now that he was seated again, with his feet on the floor. His loose mouth twitched up at the left corner, pushing that eye into a knowing squint. "I thought so." He always says something like that. "I want you to go down to Half Moon Bay and stick around Tin Star Joplin's joint for a few nights. Here are 2 photos," sliding one of Pangburn and one of the girl across the table. "Their names and descriptions are written on the backs. I want to know if either of them shows up down there, what they're doing, and where they're hanging out. It may be the Tin Star is covering them up." Porky was looking knowingly from one picture to the other. "I think I know this guy," he said, out of the corner of his mouth that twitches. That's another thing about Porky. You can't mention a name or give a description that won't bring that same remark, even though you make them up. "Here's some money." I slid some bills across the table. "If you're down there more than a couple of nights, I'll get some more to you. Keep in touch with me, either over this phone or the undercover one at the office. And remember this, lay off the stuff. If I come down there and find you all snowed up, I promise that I'll tip Joplin off to you." Footnote. Snowed up, high on heroin. End of footnote. He had finished counting the money by now. There wasn't a whole lot to count, and he threw it contemptuously back on the table. "Save that for newspapers," he sneered. "How am I going to get anywheres if I can't spend no money in the joint?" "That's plenty for a couple of days' expenses. You'll probably knock back half of it. If you stay longer than a couple of days, I'll get more to you. And you get your pay when the job is done, and not before." He shook his head and got up. "I'm tired of piking along with you. You can turn your own jobs. I'm through." Footnote. Pikin', walking. End of footnote. "If you don't get down to Half Moon Bay tonight, you are through," I assured him, letting him get out of the threat whatever he liked. After a little while, of course, he took the money and left. The dispute over expense money was simply a preliminary that went with every job I sent him out on. 11. After Porky had cleared out, I leaned back in my chair and burned half a dozen Fatimas over the job. The girl had gone first with the $20,000, and then the poet had gone, and both had gone, whether permanently or not, to the White Shack. On its face, the job was an obvious affair. The girl had given Pangburn the work to the extent of having him forge a check against his brother-in-law's account, and then, after various moves whose value I couldn't determine at the time, they had gone into hiding together. There were two loose ends to be taken care of. One of them, the finding of the Confederate who had mailed the letters to Pangburn and who had taken care of the girl's baggage, was in the Baltimore branch's hands. The other was who had ridden in the taxicab that I had traced from the girl's apartment to the Marquis Hotel. That might not have any bearing upon the job, or it might. Suppose I could find a connection between the Marquis Hotel and the White Shack. That would make a completed chain of some sort. I searched the back of the telephone directory and found the Roadhouse number. Then I went up to the Marquis Hotel. The girl on duty at the hotel switchboard, when I got there, was one with whom I had done business before. "Who has been calling Half Moon Bay numbers?" I asked her. My God! She leaned back in her chair and ran a pink hand gently over the front of her rigidly waved red hair. "I get enough to do without remembering every call that goes through. This ain't a boarding house. We have more than one call a week." "You don't have many Half Moon Bay calls," I insisted, leaning an elbow on the counter and letting a folded 5-spot keep out between the fingers of one hand. "You ought to remember any you've had lately." "I'll see," she sighed, as if willing to do her best on a hopeless task. She ran through her tickets. "Here's one, from room 522, a couple weeks ago." "What number was called?" "Half Moon Bay 51. That was the Roadhouse number. I passed over the 5-spot. "Is 522 a permanent guest?" "Yes, Mr. Kilcourse. He's been here 3 or 4 months." "What is he?" "I don't know. A perfect gentleman, if you ask me." "That's nice. What does he look like?" "Tall and elegant." "Be yourself," I pleaded. "What does he look like?" "He's a young man, but his hair is turning gray. He's dark and handsome, looks like a movie actor." "Bull, Montana?" I asked, as I moved off toward the desk. Footnote: professional wrestler and silent movie actor. End of footnote. The key to 522 was in its place in the rack. I sat down where I could keep an eye on it. Perhaps an hour later, a clerk took it out and gave it to a man who did look somewhat like an actor. He was a man of 30 or so, with dark skin and dark hair that showed gray around the ears. He stood a good 6 feet of fashionably dressed slenderness. Carrying the key, he disappeared into an elevator. I called up the agency then and asked the old man to send Dick Foley over. 10 minutes later, Dick arrived. He's a little shrimp of a Canadian. There isn't 110 pounds of him, who is the smoothest shadow I've ever seen, and I've seen most of them. "I have a bird in here I want tailed," I told Dick. "His name is Kilcourse, and he's in room 522. Stick around outside, and I'll give you the spot on him." I went back to the lobby and waited some more. At 8 o'clock, Kilcourse came down and left the hotel. I went after him for half a block, far enough to turn him over to Dick, and then went home, so that I would be within reach of a telephone if Porky Grout tried to get in touch with me. No call came from him that night. 12. When I arrived at the agency the next morning, Dick was waiting for me. "What luck?" I asked. Damnedest. The little Canadian talks like a telegram when his peace of mind is disturbed, and just now he was decidedly peevish. Took me 2 blocks, shook me, only taxi in sight. Think he made you? No. Wise head. Playing safe. Try him again then. Better have a car handy, in case he tries the same trick again. My telephone jingled as Dick was going out. It was Porky Grout, talking over the agency's unlisted line. Turn up anything? I asked. Plenty, he bragged. Good. Are you in town? Yes. I'll meet you in my rooms in 20 minutes, I said. The pasty-faced informant was fairly bloated with pride in himself when he came through the door I had left unlocked for him. His swagger was almost a cakewalk, and the side of his mouth that twitches was twisted into a knowing leer that would have fit a Solomon. I knocked it over for you, kid, he boasted. Nothing to it, for me. I went down there and talked to everybody that knowed anything, seen everything there was to see, and put the X-ray on the whole dump. I made a— I interrupted. Congratulations and so forth. But just what did you turn up? Now, let me tell you. He raised a dirty hand in a traffic cop sort of gesture and blew a stream of cigarette smoke at the ceiling. Don't crowd me. I'll give you all the dope. Sure, I said. I know. You're great, and I'm lucky to have you knock off my jobs for me and all that. But is Pangburn down there? I'm getting around to that. I went down there and— Did you see Pangburn? As I was saying, I went down there and— Porky, I said, I don't give a damn what you did. Did you see Pangburn? Yes, I seen him. Fine, now what did you see? He's camping down there with Tin Star. Him and the broad that you give me a picture of are both there. She's been there a month. I didn't see her, but one of the waiters told me about her. I seen Pangburn myself. They don't show themselves much. Stick back in Tin Star's part of the joint, where he lives, most of the time. Pangburn's been there since Sunday. I went down there and— Learn who the girl is, or anything about what they're up to? No, I went down there and— All right. Went down there again tonight. Call me up as soon as you know positively Pangburn is there, that he hasn't gone out. Don't make any mistakes. I don't want to come down there and scare them up on a false alarm. Use the agency's undercover line, and just tell whoever answers that you won't be in town until late. That'll mean Pangburn is there, and it'll let you call up from Joplin's without giving the play away. I got to have more dough, he said, as he got up. It costs— I'll file your application, I promised. Now beat it, and let me hear from you tonight, the minute you're sure Pangburn is there. Then I went up to Axford's office. I think I have a line on him, I told the millionaire. I hope to have him where you can talk to him tonight. My man says he was at the Wait Shack last night, and is probably living there. If he's there tonight, I'll take you down if you want. Why can't we go now? No. The place is too dead in the daytime for my man to hang around without making himself conspicuous, and I don't want to take any chances on either you or me showing ourselves there until we're sure we're coming face to face with Pangburn. What do you want me to do then? Have a fast car ready tonight, and be ready to start as soon as I get word to you. Righto. I'll be at home after 5:30. Phone me as soon as you're ready to go, and I'll pick you up. 13. At 9:30 that evening, I was sitting beside Axford on the front seat of a powerfully engined foreign car, and we were roaring down a road that led to Half Moon Bay. Porky's telephone call had come. Neither of us talked much during that ride, and the imported monster under us made it a rather short ride. Axford sat comfortable and relaxed at the wheel, but I noticed for the first time that he had a rather heavy jaw. The White Shack is a large building, square built of imitation stone. It is set away back from the road, and is approached by two curving driveways which, together, make a semicircle whose diameter is the public road. The center of this semicircle is occupied by sheds under which Joplin's patrons stow their cars, and here and there around the sheds are flower beds and clumps of shrubbery. We were still going at a fair clip when we turned into one end of this semicircular driveway, and Axford slammed on his brakes, and the big machine threw us into the windshield as it jolted into an abrupt stop, barely in time to avoid smashing into a cluster of people who had suddenly loomed up before us. In the glow from our headlights, faces stood sharply out, white, horrified faces, furtive faces, faces that were callously curious. Below the faces, white arms and shoulders showed, and bright gowns and jewelry against the duller background of masculine clothing. This was the first impression I got, and then, by the time I had removed my face from the windshield, I realized that this cluster of people had a core, a thing about which it centered. I stood up trying to look over the crowd's heads, but I could see nothing. Jumping down to the driveway, I pushed through the crowd. Face down on the white gravel, a man sprawled, a thin man in dark clothes, and just above his collar, where the head and neck join, was a hole. I knelt to peer into his face. Then I pushed through the crowd again, back to where Axford was just getting out of the car, the engine of which was still running. "Pangburn is dead. Shot." 14. Methodically, Axford took off his gloves, folded them, and put them in a pocket. Then he nodded his understanding of what I had told him, and walked toward where the crowd stood around the dead poet. I looked after him until he had vanished in the throng. Then I went winding through the outskirts of the crowd, hunting for Porky Grout. I found him standing on the porch, leaning against a pillar. I passed where he could see me, and went on around to the side of the roadhouse that afforded most shadow. In the shadows, Porky joined me. The night wasn't cool, but his teeth were chattering. "Who got him?" I demanded. "I don't know," he whined, and that was the first thing of which I had ever known him to confess complete ignorance. "I was inside, keeping an eye on the others." "What others?" "Ten-Star and some guy I never seen before, and the broad. I didn't think the kid was going out. He didn't have no hat." "What do you know about it?" "A little while after I phoned you, the girl and Pangburn came out from Joplin's part of the joint and sat down at a table around on the other side of the porch, where it's fairly dark. They eat for a while, and then this other guy comes over and sits down with them. I don't know his name, but I think I've seen him around town. He's a tall guy, all run up in fancy rags." "That would be Kilcourse." "They talk for a while, and then Joplin joins them. They sit around the table laughing and talking for maybe a quarter of an hour. Then Pangburn gets up and goes indoors. I got a table that I can watch 'em from, and the place is crowded, and I'm afraid I'll lose my table if I leave it, so I don't follow the kid. He ain't got no hat. I figure he ain't going nowhere. But he must have gone through the house and out front, because pretty soon there's a noise that I thought was a auto backfire, and then the sound of a car getting away quick, and then some guy squawks that there's a dead man outside. Everybody runs out here, and it's Pangburn." "You dead sure that Joplin, Kilcourse, and the girl were all at the table when Pangburn was killed?" "Absolutely," Porky said. "If this dark guy's name is Kilcourse." "Where are they now?" "Back in Joplin's hangout. They went up there as soon as they seen Pangburn had been croaked." I had no illusions about Porky. I knew he was capable of selling me out and furnishing the poet's murderer with an alibi. But there was this about it. If Joplin, Kilcourse, or the girl had fixed him, and had fixed my informant. Then it was hopeless for me to try to prove that they weren't on the rear porch when the shot was fired. Joplin had a crowd of hangers-on who would swear to anything he told them without batting an eye. There would be a dozen supposed witnesses to their presence on the rear porch. Thus, the only thing for me to do was to take it for granted that Porky was coming clean with me. "Have you seen Dick Foley?" I asked, since Dick had been shadowing Kilcourse. "No." "Hunt around and see if you can find him. Tell him I've gone up to talk to Joplin, and tell him to come on up. Then you can stick around where I can get hold of you if I want you." I went in through a French window, crossed an empty dance floor, and went up the stairs that led to Tin Star Joplin's living quarters in the rear second story. I knew the way, having been up there before. Joplin and I were old friends. I was going up now to give him and his friends a shakedown, on the off chance that some good might come of it, though I knew that I had nothing on any of them. I could have tried something on the girl, of course, but not without advertising the fact that the dead poet had forged his brother-in-law's signature to a check, and that was no go. "Come in," a heavy, familiar voice called when I rapped on Joplin's living room door. I pushed the door open and went in. Tin Star Joplin was standing in the middle of the floor, a big-bodied ex-yegg with inordinately thick shoulders and an expressionless horse face. Beyond him, Kilcourse sat dangling one leg from the corner of a table, alertness hiding behind an amused half-smile on his handsome dark face. On the other side of a room, a girl whom I knew for Jean Delano sat on the arm of a big leather chair. And the poet hadn't exaggerated when he told me she was beautiful. "You!" Joplin grunted disgustedly as soon as he recognized me. "What the hell do you want?" "What have you got?" My mind wasn't on this sort of repartee, however. I was studying the girl. There was something vaguely familiar about her, but I couldn't place her. Perhaps I hadn't seen her before. Perhaps much looking at the picture Pangburn had given me was responsible for my feeling of recognition. Pictures will do that. Meanwhile, Joplin had said, "Time to waste is one thing I ain't got." And I had said, "If you'd saved up all the time different judges have given you, you'd have plenty." I had seen the girl somewhere before. She was a slender girl in a glistening blue gown that exhibited a generous spread of front, back, and arms that were worth showing. She had a mass of dark brown hair above an oval face of the color that pink ought to be. Her eyes were wide-set and of a gray shade that wasn't altogether unlike the shadows on polished silver that the poet had compared them to. I studied the girl, and she looked back at me with level eyes, and still I couldn't place her. Kilcourse still sat dangling a leg from the table corner. Joplin grew impatient. "Will you stop gandering at the girl and tell me what you want of me?" he growled. The girl smiled then, a mocking smile that bared the edges of razor-sharp little animal teeth, and with the smile, I knew her. Her hair and skin had fooled me. The last time I had seen her, the only time I had seen her before, her face had been marble white, and her hair had been short and the color of fire. She and an older woman and 3 men and I had played hide-and-seek one evening in a house in Turk Street over a matter of the murder of a bank messenger and the theft of $100,000 worth of Liberty bonds. Through her intriguing, 3 of her accomplices had died that evening, and the 4th, the Chinese, had eventually gone to the gallows at Folsom Prison. Her name had been Elvira then, and since her escape from the house that night, we had been fruitlessly hunting her from border to border and beyond. Recognition must have shone in my eyes in spite of the effort I made to keep them blank, for, swift as a snake, she had left the arm of the chair and was coming forward, her eyes more steel than silver. I put my gun in sight. Joplin took a half-step toward me. "What's the idea?" Kilcore's slid off the table, and one of his thin, dark hands hovered over his necktie. "This is the idea," I told them. "I want the girl for a murder a couple months back, and maybe, I'm not sure, for tonight's. Anyway, I'm—" The snapping of a light switch behind me, and the room went black. I moved, not caring where I went, so long as I got away from where I had been when the lights went out. My back touched a wall, and I stopped, crouching low. "Quick, kid," a hoarse whisper that came from where I thought the door should be. But both of the room's doors, I thought, were closed, and could hardly be opened without showing gray rectangles. People moved in the blackness, but none got between me and the lighter square of windows. Something clicked softly in front of me. Too thin a click for the cocking of a gun, but it could have been the opening of a spring knife, and I remembered that tin-star Joplin had a fondness for that weapon. "Let's go. Let's go," a harsh whisper that cut through the dark like a blow. Sounds of motion, muffled, indistinguishable. One sound, not far away. Abruptly, a strong hand clamped one of my shoulders. A hard-muscled body strained against me. I stabbed out with my gun and heard a grunt. The hand moved up my shoulder toward my throat. I snapped up a knee and heard another grunt. A burning point ran down my side. I stabbed again with my gun, pulled it back until the muzzle was clear of the soft obstacle that had stopped it, and squeezed the trigger. The crash of the shot. Joplin's voice in my ear. A curiously matter-of-fact voice. God damn, that got me. 15. I spun away from him then, toward where I saw the dim yellow of an open door. I had heard no sounds of departure. I had been too busy. But I knew that Joplin had tied into me while the others made their getaway. Nobody was in sight as I jumped, slid, tumbled down the steps, any number at a time. A waiter got in my path as I plunged toward the dance floor. I don't know whether his interference was intentional or not. I didn't ask. I slammed the flat of my gun in his face and went on. Once, I jumped a leg that came out to trip me, and at the outer door, I had to smear another face. Then, I was out in the semicircular driveway, from one end of which a red tail light was turning east into the county road. While I sprinted for Axford's car, I noticed that Pangborn's body had been removed. A few people still stood around the spot where he had lain, and they gaped at me now with open mouths. The car was as Axford had left it, with idling engine. I swung it through a flower bed and pointed it east on the public road. 5 minutes later, I picked up the red point of a tail light again. The car under me had more power than I would ever need, more than I would have known how to handle. I don't know how fast the one ahead was going, but I closed in as if it had been standing still. 1.5 miles, or perhaps 2. Suddenly, a man was in the road ahead, a little beyond the reach of my lights. The lights caught him, and I saw that it was Porky Grout. Porky Grout, standing facing me in the middle of the road, the dull metal of an automatic in each hand. The guns in his hands seemed to glow dimly red, and then go dark in the glare of my headlights, glow and then go dark, like 2 bulbs in an automatic electric sign. The windshield fell apart around me. Porky Grout, the informant whose name was a synonym for cowardice, the full length of the Pacific coast, stood in the center of the road, shooting at a metal comet that rushed down upon him. I didn't see the end. I confess, frankly, that I shut my eyes when his set, white face showed close over my radiator. The metal monster under me trembled. Not very much, and the road ahead was empty except for the fleeing red light. My windshield was gone. The wind tore at my uncovered hair and brought tears to my squinted-up eyes. Presently, I found that I was talking to myself, saying, "That was Porky. That was Porky." It was an amazing fact. It was no surprise that he had double-crossed me. That was to be expected. And for him to have crept up the stairs behind me and turned off the lights wasn't astonishing. But for him to have stood straight up and died? An orange streak from the car ahead cut off my wonderment. The bullet didn't come near me. It isn't easy to shoot accurately from one moving car into another. But at the pace I was going, it wouldn't be long before I was close enough for good shooting. I turned on the searchlight above the dashboard. It didn't quite reach the car ahead, but it enabled me to see that the girl was driving, while Kilcourse sat screwed around beside her, facing me. The car was a yellow roadster. I eased up a little. In a duel with Kilcourse here, I would have been at a disadvantage, since I would have had to drive as well as shoot. My best play seemed to be to hold my distance until we reached the town, as we inevitably must. It wasn't midnight yet. There would be people on the streets of any town, and policemen. Then I could close in with a better chance of coming off on top. A few miles of this, and my prey tumbled to my plan. The yellow roadster slowed down, wavered, and came to rest with its length across the road. Kilcourse and the girl were out immediately and crouching in the road on the far side of their barricade. I was tempted to dive pell-mell into them, but it was a weak temptation, and when its short life had passed, I put on the brakes and stopped. Then I fiddled with my searchlight until it bore full upon the roadster. A flash came from somewhere near the roadster's wheels, and the searchlight shook violently, but the glass wasn't touched. It would be their first target, of course, and, crouching in my car, waiting for the bullet that would smash the lens, I took off my shoes and overcoat. The third bullet ruined the light. I switched off the other lights, jumped to the road, and when I stopped running, I was squatting down against the near side of the yellow roadster. As easy and safe a trick as can be imagined. The girl and Kilcourse had been looking into the glare of a powerful light. When that light suddenly died, and the weaker ones around it went too, they were left in pitch unseeing blackness, which must last for the minute or longer that their eyes would need to readjust themselves to the gray-black of the night. My stockinged feet had made no sound on the macadam road, and now there was only a roadster between us, and I knew it, and they didn't. From near the radiator, Kilcourse spoke softly. "I'm going to try to knock him off from the ditch. Take a shot at him now and then to keep him busy." "I can't see him," the girl protested. "Your eyes'll be all right in a second. Take a shot at the car anyway." I moved toward the radiator as the girl's pistol barked at the empty touring car. Kilcourse, on hands and knees, was working his way toward the ditch that ran along the south side of the road. I gathered my legs under me, intent upon a spring and a blow with my gun upon the back of his head. I didn't want to kill him, but I wanted to put him out of the way quick. I'd have the girl to take care of, and she was at least as dangerous as he. As I tensed for the spring, Kilcourse, guided perhaps by some instinct of the hunted, turned his head and saw me, saw a threatening shadow. Instead of jumping, I fired. I didn't look to see whether I had hit him or not, At that range, there was little likelihood of missing. I bent double and slipped back to the rear of the roadster, keeping on my side of it. Then I waited. The girl did what I would perhaps have done in her place. She didn't shoot or move toward the place the shot had come from. She thought I had forestalled kill course in using the ditch, and that my next play would be to circle around behind her. To offset this, she moved around the rear of the roadster, so that she could ambush me from the side nearest Axford's car. Thus it was that she came creeping around the corner, and poked her delicately chiseled nose plunk into the muzzle of the gun that I held ready for her. She gave a little scream. Women aren't always reasonable. They are prone to disregard trifles like guns held upon them. So I grabbed her gum hand, which was fortunate for me. As my hand closed around the weapon, she pulled the trigger, catching a chunk of my forefinger between hammer and frame. I twisted the gun out of her hand, released my finger. But she wasn't done yet. With me standing there holding a gun not 4 inches from her body, she turned and bolted off toward where a clump of trees made a jet-black blot to the north. When I recovered from my surprise at this amateurish procedure, I stuck both her gun and mine in my pockets and set out after her, tearing the soles of my feet at every step. She was trying to get over a wire fence when I caught her. 16. "Stop playing, will you?" I said crossly, as I set the fingers of my left hand around her wrist and started to lead her back to the roadster. "This is a serious business. Don't be so childish." "You are hurting my arm." I knew I wasn't hurting her arm, and I knew this girl for the direct cause of 4 or perhaps 5 deaths. Yet I loosened my grip on her wrist until it wasn't much more than a friendly clasp. She went back willingly enough to the roadster, where, still holding her wrist, I switched on the lights. Kilcourse lay just beneath the headlight's glare, huddled on his face, with one knee drawn up under him. I put the girl squarely in the line of light. "Now stand there," I said, "and behave. The first break you make, I'm going to shoot a leg out from under you." And I meant it. I found Kilcourse's gun, pocketed it, and knelt beside him. He was dead, with a bullet hole above his collarbone. "Is he—" Her mouth trembled. "Yes." She looked down at him and shivered a little. "Poor fag," she whispered. I've gone on record as saying that this girl was beautiful, and standing there in the dazzling white of the headlights, she was more than that. She was a thing to start crazy thoughts, even in the head of an unimaginative middle-aged thief-catcher. She was... Anyhow, I suppose that is why I scowled at her and said, "Yes, poor fag, and poor hook, and poor tie, and poor kid of a Los Angeles bank messenger, and poor Burke," calling the roll, so far as I knew it, of men who had died loving her. She didn't flare up. Her big gray eyes lifted, and she looked at me with a gaze that I couldn't fathom, and her lovely oval face under the mass of brown hair, which I knew was phony, was sad. "I suppose you do think—" she began, but I had had enough of this. I was uncomfortable along the spine. "Come on," I said. "We'll leave Kilcourse and the roadster here for the present." She said nothing, but went with me to Axford's big machine, and sat in silence while I laced my shoes. I found a robe on the back seat and gave it to her. "Better wrap this around your shoulders. The windshield is gone. It'll be cool." She followed my suggestion without a word, but when I had edged our vehicle around the rear of the roadster and had straightened out in the road again, going east, she laid a hand on my arm. Aren't we going back to the White Shack? No. Redwood City, the county jail. A mile, perhaps, during which, without looking at her, I knew she was studying my rather lumpy profile. Then her hand was on my forearm again, and she was leaning toward me so that her breath was warm against my cheek. Will you stop for a minute? There's some things I want to tell you. I brought the car to a halt in a cleared space of hard soil off to one side of the road, and screwed myself a little around in the seat to face her more directly. Before you start, I told her, I want you to understand that we stay here for just so long as you talk about the Pangburn affair. When you get off on any other line, then we finish our trip to Redwood City. Aren't you even interested in the Los Angeles affair? No, that's closed. You and Hook Reardon and Tai Chun Tao and the Quars were equally responsible for the messenger's death, even if Hook did the actual killing. Hook and the Quars passed out the night we had our party in Turk Street. Tai was hanged last month. Now I've got you. We had enough evidence to swing the Chinese, and we've even more against you. That is done, finished, completed. If you want to tell me anything about Pangburn's death, I'll listen. Otherwise, I reached for the self-starter. A pressure of her fingers on my arm stopped me. I do want to tell you about it, she said earnestly. I want you to know the truth about it. You'll take me to Redwood City, I know. Don't think that I have any foolish hopes. But I'd like you to know the truth about this thing. I don't know why I should care, especially what you think, but her voice dwindled off to nothing. 17. Then she began to talk very rapidly, as people talk when they fear interruptions before their stories are told, and she sat leaning slightly forward, so that her beautiful oval face was very close to mine. After I ran out of the Turk Street house that night, while you were struggling with Tai, my intention was to get away from San Francisco. I had a couple of $1,000, enough to carry me any place. Then I thought that going away would be what you people would expect me to do, and that the safest thing for me to do would be to stay right here. It isn't hard for a woman to change her appearance. I had bobbed red hair, white skin, and wore gay clothes. I simply dyed my hair, bought these transformations to make it look long, put color on my face, and bought some dark clothes. Then I took an apartment on Ashbury Avenue under the name of Jean Delano, and I was an altogether different person. But while I knew I was perfectly safe from recognition anywhere, I felt more comfortable staying indoors for a while, and to pass the time, I read a good deal. That's how I happened to run across Burke's book. Do you read poetry? I shook my head. An automobile going toward Half Moon Bay came into sight just then, the first one we'd seen since we left the White Shack. She waited until it had passed before she went on, still talking rapidly. Burke wasn't a genius, of course, but there was something about some of his things something that got inside me. I wrote him a little note, telling him how much I had enjoyed these things, and sent it to his publishers. A few days later, I had a note from Burke, and I learned that he lived in San Francisco. I hadn't known that. We exchanged several notes, and then he asked if he could call, and we met. I don't know whether I was in love with him or not. Even at first, I did like him, and between the ardor of his love for me and the flattery of having a fairly well-known poet for a suitor, I really thought that I loved him. I promised to marry him. I hadn't told him anything about myself, though now I know that it wouldn't have made any difference to him. But I was afraid to tell him the truth, and I wouldn't lie to him, so I told him nothing. Then Fag Kilcourse saw me one day on the street, and knew me in spite of my new hair, complexion, and clothes. Fag hadn't much brains, but he had eyes that could see through anything. I don't blame Fag. He acted according to his code. He came up to my apartment, having followed me home, and I told him that I was going to marry Burke and be a respectable housewife. That was dumb of me. Fag was square. If I had told him that I was ribbing Burke up for a trimming, Fag would have let me alone, would have kept his hands off. But when I told him that I was through with the graft, had gone queer, that made me his meat. You know how crooks are. Everyone in the world is either a fellow crook or a prospective victim. So, if I was no longer a crook, then Fag considered me fair game. He learned about Burke's family connections, and then he put it up to me, $20,000, or he'd turn me up. He knew about the Los Angeles job, and he knew how badly I was wanted. I was up against it then. I knew I couldn't hide from Fag or run away from him. I told Burke I had to have $20,000. I didn't think he had that much, but I thought he could get it. 3 days later, he gave me a check for it. I didn't know at the time how he had raised it, but it wouldn't have mattered if I had known. I had to have it. But that night, he told me where he got the money, that he had forged his brother-in-law's signature. He told me because, after thinking it over, he was afraid that when the forgery was discovered, I would be caught with him and considered equally guilty. I'm rotten in spots, but I wasn't rotten enough to let him put himself in the pen for me without knowing what it was all about. I told him the whole story. He didn't bat an eye. He insisted that the money be paid Kilcourse so that I would be safe, and began to plan for my further safety. Burke was confident that his brother-in-law wouldn't send him over for forgery, but, to be on the safe side, he insisted that I move and change my name again and lay low until we knew how Axford was going to take it. But that night, after he had gone, I made some plans of my own. I did like Burke. I liked him too much to let him be the goat without trying to save him, and I didn't have a great deal of faith in Axford's kindness. This was the 2nd of the month. Barring accidents, Axford wouldn't discover the forgery until he got his cancelled checks early the following month. That gave me practically a month to work in. The next day, I drew all my money out of the bank and sent Burke a letter saying that I had been called to Baltimore, and I laid a clear trail to Baltimore with baggage and letters and all, which a pal there took care of for me. Then I went down to Joplin's and got him to put me up. I let Fag know I was there, and when he came down, I told him I expected to have the money for him in a day or two. He came down nearly every day after that, and I stalled him from day to day, and each time it got easier. But my time was getting short. Pretty soon, Burke's letters would be coming back from the phony address I had given him, and I wanted to be on hand to keep him from doing anything foolish. And I didn't want to get in touch with him until I could give him the $20,000, so he could square the forgery before Axford learned of it from his cancelled checks. Fag was getting easier and easier to handle, but I still didn't have him where I wanted him. He wasn't willing to give up the $20,000, which I was, of course, holding all this time, unless I had promised to stick with him for good. And I still thought I was in love with Burke, and I didn't want to tie myself up with Fag even for a little while. Then Burke saw me on the street one Sunday night. I was careless and drove into the city in Joplin's roadster, the one back there. And as luck would have it, Burke saw me. I told him the truth, the whole truth, and he told me that he had just hired a private detective to find me. He was like a child in some ways. It hadn't occurred to him that the sleuth would dig up anything about the money. But I knew the forged check would be found in a day or two at the most. I knew it. When I told Burke that, he went to pieces. All his faith in his brother-in-law's forgiveness went. I couldn't leave him the way he was. He'd have babbled the whole thing to the first person he met. So I brought him back to Joplin's with me. My idea was to hold him there for a few days, until we could see how things were going. If nothing appeared in the papers about the check, then we could take it for granted that Axford had hushed the matter up, and Burke could go home and try to square himself. On the other hand, if the papers got the whole story, then Burke would have to look for a permanent hiding place, and so would I. Tuesday evenings and Wednesday morning's papers were full of the news of his disappearance, but nothing was said about the check. That looked good, but we waited another day for good measure. Fag Kilcourse was in on the game by this time, of course, and I had had to pass over the $20,000, but I still had hopes of getting it, or most of it, back, so I continued to string him along. I had a hard time keeping him off Burke, though, because he had begun to think he had some sort of right to me, and jealousy made him wicked. But I got Tin Star to throw a scare into him, and I thought Burke was safe. Tonight, one of Tin Star's men came up and told us that a man named Porky Grout, who had been hanging around the place for a couple of nights, had made a couple of cracks that might mean he was interested in us. Grout was pointed out to me, and I took a chance on showing myself in the public part of the place and sat at a table close to his. He was plain rat, as I guess you know, and in less than 5 minutes I had him at my table, and half an hour later I knew that he had tipped you off, that Burke and I were in the wait shack. He didn't tell me all this right out, but he told me more than enough for me to guess the rest. I went up and told the others. Fag was for killing both Grout and Burke right away, but I talked him out of it. That wouldn't help us any, and I had Grout where he would jump in the ocean for me. I thought I had Fag convinced, but we finally decided that Burke and I would take the roadster and leave, and that when you got here, Porky Grout was to pretend he was hopped up and point out a man and a woman, any who happened to be handy, as the ones he had taken for us. I stopped to get a cloak and gloves, and Burke went on out to the car alone. And Fag shot him. I didn't know he was going to. I wouldn't have let him. Please believe that. I wasn't as much in love with Burke as I had thought, but please believe that after all he had done for me, I wouldn't have let them hurt him. After that, it was a case of stick with the others whether I liked it or not, and I stuck. We ribbed Grout to tell you that all 3 of us were on the back porch when Burke was killed, and we had any number of others primed with the same story. Then you came up and recognized me. Just my luck that it had to be you, the only detective in San Francisco who knew me. You know the rest. How Porky Grout came up behind you and turned off the lights. And Joplin held you while we ran for the car. And then, when you closed in on us, Grout offered to stand you off while we got clear. And now... 18. Her voice died, and she shivered a little. The robe I had given her had fallen away from her white shoulders. Whether or not it was because she was so close against my shoulder, I shivered too, and my fingers, fumbling in my pocket for a cigarette, brought it out twisted and mashed. "That's all there is to the part you promised to listen to," she said softly, her face turned half away. "I wanted you to know. You're a horrid man, but somehow I cleared my throat, and the hand that held the mangled cigarette was suddenly steady. "Now, don't be crude, sister," I said. Your work has been too smooth so far to be spoiled by rough stuff now." She laughed, a brief laugh that was bitter and reckless and just a little weary, and she thrust her face still closer to mine, and the gray eyes were soft and placid. "Little fat detective, whose name I don't know." Her voice had a tired huskiness in it, and a tired mockery. "You think I am playing a part, don't you? You think I am playing for liberty? Perhaps I am. I certainly would take it if it were offered me. But men have thought me beautiful, and I have played with them. Women are like that. Men have loved me, and, doing what I liked with them, I have found men contemptible. And then comes this little fat detective, whose name I don't know, and he acts as if I were a hag, an old squaw. Can I help then being piqued into some sort of feeling for him? Women are like that. Am I so homely that any man has a right to look at me without even interest? Am I ugly?" I shook my head. "You're quite pretty," I said, struggling to keep my voice as casual as the words. "You beast," she spat, and then her smile grew gentle again. "And yet it is because of that attitude that I sit here and turn myself inside out for you. If you were to take me in your arms and hold me close to the chest that I am already leaning against, and if you were to tell me that there is no jail ahead for me just now, I would be glad, of course. But though, for a while, you might hold me, you would then be only one of the men with which I am familiar. Men who love and are used and are succeeded by other men. But because you do none of these things, because you are a wooden block of a man, I find myself wanting you. Would I tell you this, little fat detective, if I were playing a game?" I grunted non-committally and forcibly restrained my tongue from running out to moisten my dry lips. "I'm going to this jail tonight, if you are the same hard man who has goaded me into whining love into his uncaring ears. But before that, can't I have one whole-hearted assurance that you think me a little more than quite pretty? Or at least a hint that if I were not a prisoner, your pulse might beat a little faster when I touch you? I'm going to this jail for a long while, perhaps to the gallows. Can't I take my vanity there, not quite in tatters, to keep me company? Can't you do some slight thing to keep me from the afterthought of having bleated all this out to a man who is simply bored?" Her lids had come down half over the silver-gray eyes. Her head had tilted back so far that a little pulse showed throbbing in her white throat. Her lips were motionless over slightly parted teeth, as the last word had left them. My fingers went deep into the soft white flesh of her shoulders. Her head went further back, her eyes closed. One hand came up to my shoulder. "You're beautiful as all hell," I shouted crazily into her face and flung her against the door. It seemed an hour that I fumbled with starter and gears before I had the car back in the road and thundering toward the San Mateo County Jail. The girl had straightened herself up in the seat again and sat huddled within the robe I had given her. I squinted straight ahead into the wind that tore at my hair and face, and the absence of the windshield took my thoughts back to Porky Grout. Porky Grout, whose yellowness was notorious from Seattle to San Diego, standing rigidly in the path of a charging metal monster with an inadequate pistol in each hand. She had done that to Porky Grout, this woman beside me. She had done that to Porky Grout, and he hadn't even been human. A slimy reptile whose highest thought had been a skinful of dope, had gone grimly to death that she might get away. She, this woman whose shoulders I had gripped, whose mouth had been close under mine. I let the car out another notch, holding the road somehow. We went through a town, a scurrying of pedestrians for safety, surprised faces staring at us, street lights glistening on the moisture the wind had whipped from my eyes. I passed blindly by the road I wanted, circled back to it, and we were out in the country again. 19. At the foot of a long, shallow hill, I applied the brakes, and we snapped to motionlessness. I thrust my face close to the girl's. "Furthermore, you are a liar." I knew I was shouting foolishly, but I was powerless to lower my voice. Pangburn never put Axford's name on that check. He never knew anything about it. You got in with him because you knew his brother-in-law was a millionaire. You pumped him, finding out everything you knew about his brother-in-law's account at the Golden Gate Trust. You stole Pangburn's bank book. It wasn't in his room when I searched it, and deposited the forged Axford check to his credit, knowing that under those circumstances the check wouldn't be questioned. The next day you took Pangburn into the bank, saying you were going to make a deposit. You took him in, because with him standing beside you, the check to which his signature had been forged wouldn't be questioned. You knew that, being a gentleman, he'd take pains not to see what you were depositing. Then you framed the Baltimore trip. He told the truth to me, the truth so far as he knew it. Then you met him Sunday night, maybe accidentally, maybe not. Anyway, you took him down to Joplin's, giving him some wild yarn that he would swallow, and that would persuade him to stay there for a few days. That wasn't hard, since he didn't know anything about either of the $20,000 checks. You and your pal Kilcourse knew that if Pangburn disappeared, nobody would ever know that he hadn't forged the Axford check, and nobody would ever suspect that the second check was phony. You'd have killed him quietly, but when Porky tipped you off that I was on my way down, you had to move quick, so you shot him down. That's the truth of it," I yelled. All this while she had watched me with wide gray eyes that were calm and tender, but now they clouded a little, and a pucker of pain drew her brows together. I yanked my head away and got the car in motion. Just before we swept into Redwood City, one of her hands came up to my forearm, rested there for a second, patted the arm twice, and withdrew. I didn't look at her, nor, I think, did she look at me while she was being booked. She gave her name as Jean Delano and refused to make any statement until she had seen an attorney. It all took a very few minutes. As she was being led away, she stopped and asked if she might speak privately with me. We went together to a far corner of the room. She put her mouth close to my ear so that her breath was warm again on my cheek, as it had been in the car, and whispered the vilest epithet of which the English language is capable. Then she walked out to her cell.